Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Thursday, March 14th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. An important follow-up to the Zionist propaganda never-ending cycle. Really one of the things that I continue to find the most exhausting of this entire process of the focus on this discussion of Palestine and Israel is just the incessant, never-ending repetition of things that have, and I don't even just mean like the differing of opinion, you know, the history and the narratives. I mean things that are fundamentally, objectively proven to be false based on any metric you can possibly go by, and yet people like I discuss on the show just continue to go on Twitter and just say it. Not that I should not necessarily care about that, aside from the fact that many of them are government representatives for Israel or have massive influence on our government for any number of political or lobbying reasons. It's really incredible. But it's just something that I can't let go, and I'm going to continue to try to break down why. And I can't let it go because I still notice that it does influence certain people. And my job is to try to reach those people at all costs, even if it's not the majority. Because I frankly think the majority is seeing through this. I really do. And through a lot of different conversations. We're actually going to start today with a conversation around TikTok, because I definitely think this is part of that conversation, and censorship in general, whether it be on TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, anywhere, Google at large, it's not a new conversation. So what's been going on here around the TikTok conversation, we've already discussed a couple times, I think twice actually, leading up to this. But this is a little bit different. It is still, in my mind, a level of censorship, and you could even more so look at it as a step leading to potentially even more than we've seen in the past censorship. But it's also about buying perspectives of other international entities. It's a really interesting conversation. But either way, it comes down to your government leaning, really bowing to the interests of a foreign entity, and having that dictate what you can see as an American. That should bother you no matter what perspective what pretend paradigm side you think you're coming from. It should bother you. And we're going to talk about how that's happening and why it's important and what it could ultimately mean in a larger context. Then we're going to talk about, right out of the gate today, I want to start, and from the Israel conversation forward, I want to make a big point, and we've already talked about it more than once. Robert's written more than one article just on the last American Vagabond about this, but I want to discuss the right of return. It's such an obvious, it's something that shouldn't really need to be explained. It's in fact like the most foundational part of this entire conversation. And even going back to the documents from the UN, like the foundational point of the deciding factor, rather, of peace in the Middle East. But it's interesting how long that conversation's been had, like whole, what's the right word for, I don't know, donate charities and events and songs about, peace in the Middle East. And you come back, when you do your research and you come to find out that it all comes back to this one point that has been not just maintained, but inflamed and ignored and manipulated and convoluted by the very people that are pretending and try to reach that peace. It's really, it is fascinating actually to see how this has gone, but it's one of those things that kind of makes you momentarily, at the very least, lose faith in humanity, until I realize that these people are not humanity. It's us. They are the minority in that sense. We, as the people, are the ones they're desperately trying to manipulate. So we pretend that's what they're doing, the right thing for the right reasons. It's not actually what's happening. But the right of return is such a foundational part of all this. And this is why the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency, the UNRWA, is under attack. And we're going to go through, we've already done a point about why the plan has been laid out, but I'm going to do that again in the context of the historical understanding of what this group was started for, and why the right of return is so fundamentally problematic for the Zionist agenda, because it ultimately highlights that what they are as an entity in general, the state of Israel, is illegal. Now, that's not to say that we've discussed since like 1967 forward, at the very least, that they're the only way to find something lasting peace, because of the illegitimate nature that Zionist government has forced in all this time. And that includes on its own people, that we can acknowledge, because of all the criminal activity that we're discussing right there, that it's not fair to take it out on the Israeli people or the Palestinian people. But realize it's acknowledging they broke the law, acknowledging they do not, care about the right of return, or that they occupy land illegally in the first place, or the Nakbas and the ethnic cleansing that took place. So it's all acknowledged, but that because of where we are now going forward, which even I could acknowledge is a logical point, that then we would decide that there should be some kind of an agreement, but all of it ends up being about Palestinians going back to what is rightfully theirs, at least to some degree. UNRWA highlights the fact that they are still illegally occupying territory. And what's so frustrating in this dynamic is that they can't have any solution without first acknowledging that point, because every solving point in all of this comes back to the reality that they are taking Palestinian land. So this whole conversation about a two-state solution, the right of return, I mean, literally everything that every other country is talking about, the United States, Britain, all fundamentally comes back to the idea that, yes, they are illegally occupying Palestinian land, and they have to acknowledge that so this can be done. And we'll come back to the documents, the UN discussion itself, and right to this very point, so from 67 forward, even before, acknowledging that the only thing holding this up was Israel's lack of acknowledgement of this discussion that they agreed to, but also the fact that they have never yet once taken steps in achieving that, always blaming it on, by the way, what we now know, the very group they've been funding in order to maintain that excuse, Hamas, or any other elements they point to that they also have a hand in creating and maintaining. And this is the kind of thing we've discussed when it comes to the war on terror, the United States. It's the same story at a bigger scale, funding the radical elements to justify your presence anywhere in the world. Don't forget, Israel's government more than once has publicly stated to the world, and this has been highlighted by even corporate media, they have a right to legislate anywhere in the world, the Zionist government has said publicly. International law does not bound them because they speak to a higher power. This is my point about the idea of the God-given mindset in a day, talking about just yesterday about the idea of sacrificing the red calf, which like a literal conversation, actually growing, manufacturing specifically genetically engineered red calves, which I myself was like, are you sure that's true? When I heard it the first time, it was a corporate media interview, literally talking to them. And the idea being, this is a calf that's going to be slaughtered, like an animal sacrifice. Like, how is that where we are today? When and these are the people, the Zionist extremist mentality that we're allowing to drive all of this other conversation. It's extremist mentality. And we're going to talk about today why that is both abusing, and as we have for such a long time, not just Palestinian people, not just Arabs, not just Muslims, but Jewish people, Israelis. What they're doing is putting everybody in a position of insecurity, and then continuing to use the pretend victimhood of what they've created to justify why everything needs to be maintained. You need to listen to Orthodox Jewish groups around the world who are screaming that they do not represent every Jew in the world. And what they're doing is what's creating the animosity towards the Jewish people at large. And it's misdirected. The animosity is aimed at the Zionist agenda. They don't recognize that they're being misdirected by the Zionist agenda to blame somebody else. Now, all of that may sound like crazy nonsense to someone who's never heard it before, until you start recognizing that every single thing that I've discussed can be easily proven with their own words, their own documentation, or if you just care to listen to what they say to their own people. And it's really unnerving to recognize how obvious it's been for so very long. And to just dismiss it all as anti-Semitic while we're literally fighting for Jewish people, Muslim people, Palestinian, Arab, Israeli alike, it becomes very ignorant to recognize that very ignorant, and then to recognize that it's all about hiding the larger conversation. So let's start with, and by the way, as always, many different points we're following up on. Ceasefire, hostage discussions, but those two parts are the main part of today, and we'll see where we get to with time. Now, this is a tweet that recently came out from Massey that I think is really important. They really this is what the newest version of this that caught my attention because of at least the House version of the bill, HR, I got it right here, HR 7521, that literally discusses, websites as well. From the Senate version, I think it was even the older one. I think it was called started with a D. I'm just blanking on the word that they used, but it was the older versions of this they've tried before. It didn't necessarily highlight specifically like a web, or I would even say more broadly a website, but was focused on applications and so on. So this I found very concerning. And as he writes, one of the only few calling this out, this so-called TikTok ban is a Trojan horse. as most of our legislation tends to be, the president will be given the power to ban websites, not just apps. Now, that doesn't really give you the full picture because it's not as specific, but I will say right out of the gate, almost with, I will be willing to say literally anything that they pass in legislation, and far back as you want to look, quite frankly, but especially today, there's always language that makes these things, they're capable of bending it into almost whatever they want. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's honest or that other honest people in political positions wouldn't notice that, but we know that happens. Sort of like, the line will say, made for this and it has to happen this way and other purposes or things like that. And I point this out all the time. It just leaves an opening for you could try to squeeze something in there and make a rational argument for why that fits in that area, and then it just becomes subjective and people with political needs and justifications, lobbying, they can drive whatever they ultimately want. So the reason I'm saying that is it's not as simple as saying he's got the power to ban websites. It's very specific what's written out. I'll go through it next. But that's not to say that they couldn't just find a way to bend it into what they want, right? But we have to pretend as if there is law and at the very least, our perception of what we're told the law controls that guides their actions to some degree. Anytime at any point, anybody with authority could choose to circumvent that, choose to use their power to lie to you about it. But we always seem to pretend, and I think it does hold true to some degree, that they can't just act any way they want all the time because eventually somebody in power would recognize an opportunity to push them out of the way and pretend that they care about what you think. Or maybe I'm just super jaded and maybe they do care. Either way, it's easy to see that this could happen, but ultimately it comes down to having to bend this into the way it applies to specifically like ByteDance, the company that owns TikTok, and some other TikTok variant. And I'll show you the specific language. To me, the biggest issue is trying to bend any of these app, website, or whatever into a foreign adversary supported. Like it gets real flimsy when it gets into the idea that as long as you're like influenced or supported in some way that they argue they can prove, which we know how flimsy that gets, they could shut you down. That's what I was saying the other day. If they're calling us, at any point, whatever the focal point is, right now it's going to be, pro the Palestinian Hamas funded website or whatever, because you pretend, they got a donation from a guy that lives in Iran and we know Iran funds Hamas, therefore shut him down. We know that's what happens. I've seen that stuff happen from a government level. Flimsy, completely baseless. And we'll go over some of that stuff they're using to try to pretend what they're claiming about TikTok that I don't think is completely proven. As he goes on to say, the person breaking the law, the new law is deemed to be the U.S. or offshore internet hosting company or app store, not the foreign adversary. So essentially blaming the intermediary, but you know how this works. It's not the U.S. government doesn't have any legal authority to use their laws to go after somebody essentially in another country, even though they arguably do that all the damn time. So this is essentially after the intermediary or whatever the app would be, or the person that owns that company, claiming they're doing this to circumvent this bill. So before we get into some other important stuff, and I'm going to go over the bill itself, so just a few things I want you to see. I want you to think about this, the way that it's being framed. Now, I'm just as concerned that it could be any conversation could be a foreign adversary, or let's just say a foreign country. Because adversary means whatever the U.S. wants it to mean whenever it wants it to. It's their adversaries half the time are people that care more about your rights than they do. But the point is, a foreign country, we should be concerned about any country trying to manipulate our interests, whether that's for their interest or not, or even if it's your interest. Like, you should just care that somebody else is trying to drive you in a direction, whether or not they care about what you think, whether that's China, Russia, Israel, or just the United States for their own purposes against you. My point in saying all of that is that I don't think it's as clear as they try to pretend it is, that this is just specifically a Chinese company asset trying to do X, Y, and Z. But I wouldn't be surprised if it is. I don't think it's any different than Twitter, Facebook, or any of the rest of them, as much as all these wild China hawks that are all pushing a specific right-wing partisan agenda want you to think it is. They just don't want you to acknowledge their version of the same damn thing that it manipulates you every day, which is the Twitters of the world and everything else. But here, this Censor man writes, and there's a video I want to play from, I'm blanking on his name. This guy's a pretty popular creator on Twitter and elsewhere. You guys recognize him. We've talked about him before. I'm just blanking on his name. It's simply saying, who's really behind this ban? TikTok has 103 million monthly active users in the United States. More than a third, 37%, of mobile internet users actively engage in TikTok. Now, again, these are all complete numbers that are taken from, I don't ever see these numbers as absolute picture. Sort of like polls are never the full picture, but they can give you an insight. Half of TikTok, he writes, TikTok's U.S. users are between the age of 10 and 29, with teens making up the bulk of their user base. Over 50% of the content creators are between 18 and 24, which makes sense. I mean, even myself, I'm well past that age. I just have a, maybe it's just because of my long form content. I have a hard time with things that are short, like TikTok stuff. It drives me crazy because it just feels like you're forcing people to think in very small terms instead of expanding your thought. But I think that's actually part of the point. No different than short characters on Twitter, by the way. But it says from October 23rd to the 30th of 2023, posts with the hashtag Stand With Palestine were posted 10 times more than the post with I Stand With Israel. Now, to certain people, that's all they need to see. That's proof. But see, even if you think that there is some kind of slant and it's not the people that just want to see that, or in reverse, that it's not all the other platforms censoring the pro-Palestine content, I'm not saying I know one way or the other. But if you are taking that as proof just because that must be what you think because there's no chance that people stand with Palestine, well, that's subjective as hell. But that's a lot of this conversation, and quite frankly, a lot of everything involved in mainstream politics and the two-party illusion in general. As long as we're able to acknowledge that, typically people on the higher sides of the two-party illusion don't want to acknowledge that, but we know that's how it works. So if it just seeing more Palestinian content, it can't be the only reason that we end up deciding that. But that's sort of the push that came along. We saw articles written about this. Posts with the hashtag Stay on Palestine also received 5 times as many views. Same point, a little bit further into the data. With TikTok, when TikTok was accused of deliberately pushing pro-Palestinian content, you realize with no basis for that, just the idea that clearly it's all Palestine content, so you must be pushing that. There's not any provable evidence to show that they were algorithmically doing that. In fact, what they showed at the very least, which you could say they lied, as always, showed the opposite. But then you end up in a position where you've actually got some data, even if you think they lied about it, versus a narrative. And we keep doing that with all these conversations. Fact, narrative, database, information, and then Israel goes, I disagree, here's why, and that's it. And people go, well, I believe them. Well, here's their own IDF saying otherwise. Here's the UN. Oh, they're Hamas. Here's the US even disagree. No. I'm going to go off what they said on Twitter. Here's where they wrote this out as text on Twitter. That's what I believe. It's this confounding reality, which we know it's not just this conversation. It happened in COVID. It happens all the time. But they're really taking advantage of that right now. But on a good note, I really don't think it's as many people as they're pretending it is. But it says when TikTok was accused of deliberately pushing pro-Palestinian content, they denied the claim and made it clear with their algorithm that it's whatever people engage with. Jonathan Greenblatt of ADL, of course, which is an extremely powerful Jewish Zionist organization that has often targeted free speech, was very worried by this. We have a clip that we can play. We've played this in the past already. Seeing Generation Z in the U.S. overwhelmingly support Palestine in the face of Israeli aggression made him worry, definitely. And I'll play the clip down here. And it is such a coincidence that today the TikTok ban bill passes after months of Congress pushing for it so heavily. They are demanding that the Chinese company ByteDance sell the platform if the app wants to remain in the U.S., which I don't get why that makes. I mean, think about how ridiculous it is. And I'll make that point when we go through the actual bill. So you're telling me that the app's a problem because it is made to influence and manipulate people. They're claiming it's like the algorithm, the actual technology is designed to be able to manipulate and so on and see how they're doing it here in X, Y, and Z, right? But that's all fine as long as we control it. Is that not the most obvious thing on the surface of the bill? Sell it to a U.S. entity and we'll ignore all that. No, then you'll just use it the same way they do. That's what it's so crazy how obvious that is. They're not saying to change anything. So you're either arguing, and by the way, just again, they're explicitly argued more than once. I've watched these things about how the algorithm is designed to do that. I mean, you could argue they'll change that or whatever. I highly doubt that. But you could just argue that it's only the entity driving the company. But either way, they've made plenty of arguments to make it clear. So they're simply saying we want to control the propaganda machine, which is anybody even shocked by that? With the ADL being so entangled with this decision, he writes, I would imagine they'd want to manipulate the algorithm to push pro-Israel content, which they're public about that, while halting pro-Palestinian content, which, by the way, we've seen a dramatic push in that direction on Twitter. Nobody can deny that at this point, as much as they keep trying to pretend. And I will get into more of the propaganda today if we get to it. We'll see how much we get into. But there's a lot of this stuff, a lot of these counter manipulations coming out where, like, for example, I'll make a point today about conflating Zionism and Judaism. And the point is that on that very point, I make a very clear, very well said point about why that's not the case. And somebody, some account with one follower and one person they followed says underneath me that we all know that Zionism and Judaism are all connected because they both deny the Holocaust, and I know you agree, Ryan, like that kind of stuff. And I'm like, that doesn't even seem real. Like, that seems like somebody trying to put in. And then, of course, there's classic people that follow everything I do and post, and nobody, trolls, like provable people that do it after every single post. I have them all muted, so I can't even see it. But you can see that they follow up under these and go, see, and they point at it. And I'm like, that seems very contrived. In any case, you see a lot of these very clumsy efforts to try to create the very thing that they can point to say, see, we told you, right? Here's a Palestinian who you catch in a weird symbol and you go, see, they're all Nazis. And it's like this weird jump to kind of conflate everything. It's not really working, quite frankly, but this is the kind of thing we're talking about. And it says the Chinese lobby isn't a lobby Americans should be worried about. This is his opinion. It's the Zionist one. Now, I think we should be worried about all of them. There's no any foreign entity that's trying to lobby to manipulate the way you see the world, even if they think it's in your best interest. If it's not stated publicly that's the way it's happening, that should be a problem for you. Even if you agree with the content. Like we have this very kind of childish mindset in a lot of ways in this country about, as long as it's what we think, then we should ignore like the dynamics around it. And that's not, we're being manipulated even if it's what we believe in many cases. And this is because the Zionist lobby has been altering U.S. domestic and foreign policy for over half a century. Now that I agree with, but people would make the argument that China has been trying to do the same thing as well. I'm only saying that to be objective. I think the evidence is overwhelmingly slanted on Israel, but either way, we should be considering and concerned about any of those things happening. Evidence is overwhelming. So knowing that the Zionist lobby has been completely influencing the policy in this country, which you can prove, just because people call that anti-Semitic, when you can literally prove these things with their statements, with the fact that I've shown this before in the past, that at any given moment, look through the legislation in this country, and you'll find half of it involves Israel for some reason. Things that have nothing to do with Israel whatsoever. Bills about funding for hurricanes suddenly involve, I won't boycott Israel. It's crazy. There's no way a logical person cannot recognize that. And to try to conflate that with anything to do with Judaism is the exact game that they're playing. Now, to watch this, I find this goes over the clip that we've showed before, and I'll actually play the full thing about Greenblatt on the record, not knowing that, by the way, or rather, let's say being recorded and not aware of that in a conversation that has been verified. This was publicly discussed about not only the problem they have with TikTok, specifically because of the pro-Palestinian content, not because it's being manipulated, but because it's just happening, and that we have to stifle that because that's what young Americans think. On the record, but they're lying about it publicly, even though you can literally play his voice next to him and tell him he's lying. They don't care. And then also, in a very interesting way, admitting that they have spies inside of American activist groups. I mean, this is a group that professes to be an American group, but it's literally, think of it like this. This is a group that is lobbying for Israel, or I guess the ADL more so trying to censor for Israel, and spying on American activists for a foreign country. That is wildly alarming. But of course, because it's Israel, we all pretend like it's not happening. Now, right there, saying that right there, people would love to try to pretend I just meant that I hate Jewish people. Doesn't that seem crazy to you? Didn't say that, don't mean that. But and I'm glad that's finally losing power. Now, let's listen to what he has to say. This is an important clip.
Pushing another TikTok ban bill really hard, but something does not add up about it at all.
Bro, I've been trying to wrap my head around this for the last couple days and nothing was making sense until I stumbled upon this leaked recording. First off, what I'm about to get into is highly controversial. It's extremely sensitive, so I'm gonna have to be really careful about it. This leaked recording is from about 4 or 5 months ago. It's Jonathan Greenblatt. He is the head of the Anti-Defamation League.
And so we really have a TikTok problem, a Gen Z problem, because again, like we've been chasing this left-right divide. It's the wrong game. The real game is the next generation, that our community needs to put the same brains that gave us TACLI, the same brains that gave us all these other amazing innovations, need to put our energy toward this, like fast.
Clear as day, we have a generational problem, we have a TikTok problem, and we're going to need to put all our energy into this. And if there's any lobby that owns more US politicians, it is this one. I can't really say it out loud, but this is the one. Democrats and Republicans.
Doesn't that frustrate you? I mean, doesn't that speak for itself? Now, you could argue that he thinks that he's wrong, that he thinks if he says that out loud, something will happen. But just not, like for those in the podcast, he's highlighting a thing on the page that says the Israel lobby. And just goes, this lobby here, and I can't say it. Now, I actually agree with him. Now, it's not that he can't say it, but if he says the Israel lobby, that gets recognized by some algorithm, whether TikTok or wherever else is being posted. And I also agree, there is a difference there. And you might get flagged or censored or later called out for being a racist. Simply because you're going, the Israel lobby has a lot of power in influencing policy, which again is literally what a lobbying group is paid to do. But if you highlight that Israel does that, the job it's supposed to do as a lobbying group, you get called racist. I think it was Elon Omar, I forget who said it. One of them pointed out that the Israel lobby influences policy, and she got attacked. And it was the most comical point at that point in time. I was laughing about it myself. So you call out them for lobbying and you're a racist because the lobbying group lobbies? It's crazy to me. But right there, he's afraid to even say the words Israel lobby.
Energy into this. And if there's any lobby that owns more US politicians, it is this one. I can't really say it out loud, but this is the one. Democrats and Republicans alike fear this lobby's clout. We can count on well over half the House, 250 to 300 members, to do reflexively whatever they want.
Now, just so you realize, he's called. This is directly from a corporate media article discussing AIPAC specifically, and that is the lobbying side of this from Israel, and it's allegedly an American group, but it's very clearly acting in the explicit interest of Israel. And the point is, they're saying, we can count on well over half the House, 250 to 300 members, to do reflexively whatever AIPAC wants. Now, again, you could pretend that's a racist thing to say, even though it's literally a stated thing about AIPAC. But how about we just pretend we're talking about the big pharma lobby or big tobacco? Right? It's the same conversation. If we literally go, they're going, look, let's go back to the time with that peak of the conversation. Say big tobacco at any moment in time can count on these people reflexively voting in their direction. Why? Because they fund them for $100 million, for whatever it is, $100,000, $1 million. It's the same thing. But why is it racist to say it about Israel? I think it's obvious. You guys know, but I'm hoping there's new people out there that suddenly go, yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
In 24 hours, we could have the signatures of 70 senators on this napkin, literally playing out right before our very eyes. There's also this Time magazine article that just came out. Why TikTok needs to be sold or banned before the 2024 election.
Because they're arguing there's going to be election interference. So if you sell it and put the power of that propaganda machine in the hands of somebody else, are you pretending they're not going to use that to influence election? I mean, it's influencing the election, which is one of the things that's listed in the bill. Literally could mean posting Facebook and TikTok memes, according to these people. That's literally what they argued. So now the idea is that you're just not allowed to say anything about the election. And if you dare post your thoughts about what's going on TikTok, well, suddenly you're influencing for China or whoever owns it now. It's almost childish, isn't it?
The article barely even mentions China or election security. Almost the entirety of it focuses solely on this issue right here.
For the podcast, he's highlighting U.S. views on top opinionated Israel-Hamas TikTok hashtags. So what his point is, and he's not going to say it because same thing is going to be already being censored. He's highlighting the fact that this entire article about the idea that we need to ban TikTok and publicly being discussed by Josh Hawley and all the rest of them as being China. It's all bad CCP China and that they're influencing our elections. But weirdly, this entire article is about why it's against Israel. That's pretty obvious to me.
Another chart from the article. And
that one says platform usage.
Another chart.
And anti-Semitic, anti-Israel views.
From the article. And the ironic thing is that, yes, it's true. A foreign government has infiltrated the U.S., except it's just not the country they want you to think it is.
It's funny how, remember when there was the Russiagate conversation? A lot of us were going, it's not Russiagate, it's Israelgate. That's the point right there. It's always been Israel Gate, and nobody wants to pay attention to that. Or, a lot of people don't. So it's thank God people are finally connecting the dots. But, to we each have our own pace, man. We each have a time. It takes some kind of moment to get us to wake up, not to everything, but to some things that are, earth shattering, that cognitive dissonance moment. It takes something to really push you over that edge. So thank God people are finally starting to ask these questions. Now, this is Jerusalem Post. This was from the 12th. House set to vote on bill that could trigger TikTok ban with support from major Jewish group. So why would that make sense? Why would a major Jewish, which in my opinion, these groups we're discussing are major Zionist organizations, does not mean that there's not Jewish people. Obviously, that is the case. But I always want you to think about our conversations about what the Zionist agenda really is, which means they're manipulating, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of major Jewish organizations in the world, manipulating Judaism and the Jewish people within it to believe that Zionism is actually the same as Judaism. And that's the game. That's the manipulation. There's plenty of Jewish organizations around the world screaming that's not the case. And they'll call them anti-Jewish or self-hating Jews and whatever else. If we get to it, I have a point at the end today. So my point is, when you read this, in my mind, I'm reading Zionist organizations, but you guys can decide for yourself. And they're saying, my point was, why would either a Jewish organization or a Zionist organization or both overlapping care about China influencing the U.S. election? Well, even if you believe that's exactly the case, doesn't that suggest that they believe that China is going to influence it in a way against Israel's interests? Well, why is Israel's interest on the table in regard to a U.S. election? You start to put the pieces together, especially since, well, really what you might even look at, even if you think this is the case, is Israel and China vying for control over what we think and see and vote for, not our own politicians. It's just crazy, isn't it? How ridiculous and obvious it all is. And we're really just arguing over who's actually influencing our government other than us. But if you read into this, it simply says one of the most prominent Jewish groups in the country has thrown its support behind fast advancing bill that could lead to the massively popular video TikTok app banned in the United States. Well, and again, that is ultimately where I see it going, as much as they're trying to push back on the idea that it's not a ban, just because they open the door for saying, hey, if you just sell it to one of us, it'll be okay. But it's essentially a ban anyway, because to that person, because you're not allowing them to be involved. So either way, my point would be either they're going to sell it to someone in the U.S. and that person gets voted out of the process anyway, or they're not going to sell it, which would effectively be a ban. So it's the semantics game they always play. But it's saying politicians backing the bill, who include leaders from both parties, have centered their criticism on TikTok on national security concerns, specifically related to Chinese overlap. Jewish Federations of North America, which is the group we're discussing, represents hundreds of organized Jewish communities and groups around the world, and they've just put a lot of effort behind this. I find that to be pretty telling. Now, here is, even just in the general simple sense, why do they care about whether China influences this? Because understand, these are not groups that are unique to just the United States, right? It does say Federation of North America, but you realize that they has aggressive influence coming from the Zionist organizations inside of Israel. And that is the way that these organizations work. It is a public conversation, acting both in the interest of Israel and the United States. And the question always becomes, if it comes down to those two things contradicting each other, which way they're going to lean. That's supposed to be a racist conversation. It's just a static, it's a logical point to make. Same thing if it was a German organization or any other organization. If they're acting on the guise or the reality that they act in the interest of both simultaneously, what happens when something comes along that puts them to the choice? It's amazing how everything's racist if it involves Israel, but if it's about anybody else, it's a completely normal, benign conversation. Now let's look. I want to go through this quickly on HR 7521 and just show you some of the things I highlighted. Now, in the beginning, it says, and to make you hopefully better understand the nuance to this, it says, to protect the national security of the United States from the threat posed by foreign adversary controlled applications. That's where it all rests for me right there. If they decide that you're controlled, whether you know it or not, that's how this could apply. It says such as, that's important right there, TikTok and any successor application or service and any other applications or service developed or provided by ByteDance Limited or an entity under the control of ByteDance. Now, if you ignore the importance of the term such as, it would sound as if it's locked in only at TikTok, ByteDance associated things, and those that maybe are later funded by those groups. But all it really says, and these things are always they're meaningful. These are written, drafted very specifically by lawyers, is that they're saying foreign adversary controlled applications, and then it's such as things like this, does not mean it is limited to those things. I think that's important. As long as they argue you're foreign adversary controlled, and it does get more specific down here, then that's all that matters to them. It shall be unlawful for an entity to distribute, maintain, or update, in parentheses, or enable the distribution, maintenance, or updating of a foreign adversary controlled application by carrying out within the land or maritime borders of the United States any of the following. So just right there, what it's talking about is, in any way, like let's say you take this, and it talks about the source code more than once, and try to start this new thing in the United States, then you're breaking the law. But how does that differ from them selling the, oh, I get it. So they have to sell it to one of their people, right? What if Ryan stood up and said, I want to buy it? Doesn't that make me violating this rule? Well, it's because I'm not one of the people that they want to control it. That's how I read that. It's the same difference, isn't it? But either way, it says providing services, distribution, maintenance, any way, shape, or form you might try to set up an operation or through some kind of service from other overseas, try to facilitate the running of anything they deem one of the things they're listing off. And I'll get down to that in a second. Providing internet hosting services, enable distribution, maintenance, any of those things. Now it says does not apply, exemptions here, does not apply to a foreign adversary controlled application with respect to which a qualified divestiture is executed before the date on which a prohibition under subsection A would begin. And then it also weirdly says, which seems kind of, I guess not contradictory, it just means like if no matter what happens, this applies. So I don't know why you would need to say both of them, but it says, it does not apply to those who divest, right? So if China divests from this before the date, then we don't care, which just doesn't make any sense to me. So all you're claiming is that China's involvement is the problem, not the actual propaganda. But then it also says it shall cease to apply in the case of a foreign adversary controlled application with respect to qualified divestiture is executed after the date. Right. So it doesn't matter when it happens. As long as China's out of the way, we'll pretend everything's back to normal. That's what that essentially means. Then it says controlled by a foreign adversary. This is the crux of the point for me. This seems to have the most detail. The term controlled by a foreign adversary means with respect to a covered company, that term is important in this too, or other entity, that such company or other entity is a foreign person that is domiciled in, is headquartered in, has its principal place of business in, or is organized under the laws of a foreign adversary country. It's adversary is the point. So it's okay if it's in Germany, let's say, or Spain or Britain, but not in China or Russia or anywhere else. Or Israel's okay, right? Because all the allies. So think about it. What happens if this suddenly just gets sold to another, what about this? What happens if the Singaporean owner decides to move to Israel or Britain? Is that okay now? But by law, it should be. But how much you want to bet that wouldn't be okay? Because they're just pretending this guy's secretly beholden to the CCP, even though he's blatantly stated otherwise. And the argument is that based on the company itself, ByteDance, that is what is beholden to the CCP. But what if he decides to move, sell it to something or other, just start a brand new name for a new company and move to Britain? You see my point? Maybe that's what's going to happen. I just think that's interesting because the whole point is, and I'll show you the clips, they're drilling this guy like they know secretly that he's just lying about everything. So clearly it seems odd that they just make it only about if it's no longer connected to this company or affiliated to China. And it says an entity with respect to which a foreign person or combination of foreign persons described in this section directly or indirectly own at least 20% stake. So it's the same idea. So if ByteDance or whatever they deem to be a foreign adversary has 20% at least, that's a problem. A person subject to the direction or control of a foreign person or entity described in some, okay, that is where I agree with Massey. There's the point where it becomes opaque, it becomes broad. Subject to the direction or control of a foreign person? It doesn't even say foreign adversary. It says literally foreign person. But it says the term controlled by foreign adversary means with respect to covered company or other entity that such a company or other entity is subject to the direction of a control of a foreign person. So now suddenly just if a foreign person is directing your platform, tell me if I'm reading that wrong, A, B, and C, that's one of the options. they could argue that you're now controlled by a foreign adversary. But it does say, or entity described in subsection A or B, and goes down here to describe more about, in general, what a covered company is, which adds more to it. But realize right there, I agree with Massey. If they wanted to bend this into it, they could argue that the last American Vagabond is being directed by some China company or some Russian company or whatever it is that day they're obsessed about, and then make some argument about why. I mean, look, this is the point that I made a long time ago, especially for platforms like ours. We get donations from anybody. I don't filter my donations. It's an open post and a link, and anybody, anywhere in the world can decide to donate. Now, what happens if somebody affiliated with the government of China decides to donate something to it? And I have no idea, or nobody does, because it's an open donation platform. And they suddenly just try to make the argument, here's money coming that went to TLAV that comes, oh, there you go. You see my point? Almost trying to incentivize you to not have an open donation-based system. Either way, you get the point. It's easy for them, if they wanted to try to make this happen. And I foresee an onslaught, as I think a lot of us do. Whitney Webb has been tweeting a lot about that in the last week. We're both on the same page. We were just actually discussing about potentially going back to print. And just on a side point about, in addition to what we try to do, just in the worry that this will ultimately get to that direction. I know a lot of people think that that's crazy. I mean, how many things that we've discussed that have later come to pass were called crazy just before? And that's not even just TLAV, it's just anybody, right? The idea that we might actually get to a point to where we're no longer allowed to access things without iris scans or fingerprints or face scans or any kind of other confirmation, biometric or otherwise, to actually access the internet. They've proposed these things, let alone censoring your website, right? Just actual engagement. This is the first, these are steps in that direction. Now, a covered company, as it says, means an entity that operates directly or indirectly, including through a parent company, a subsidiary, or affiliate, a website. Right there, desktop application, mobile application, or augmented or immersive technology, which is interesting. So they're already seeing down the line. They're including augmented reality. There's even they'll get to a section down below where it talks about biotechnology. Like, they see this going way down the line in ways that become like the metaverse style or virtual reality, or God only knows where they're seeing this go. Either way, it's worrisome to me that I can't even place why that makes sense. But either way, other than the obvious point about immersive technology being in something they can, dump advertisements or whatever else in front of you, but a parent company. Okay, so now what about all these people that are being funded by, whoever? That's just a company that reached out. You look into them, they look legitimate, and then you find out it's a secret shell company for something over here. Now, these are all abstract possibilities. My point is simply that you could even argue that could be done intentionally. Set up some pro-truth group that the government sets up that they pretend is connected to China, and all of a sudden knock down a bunch of platforms because they took money from this group. Please call me a conspiracy theorist. This is how these people operate. But covered company, of course, is listed up here, right? In what a controlled adversary means. And that was one of them with respect to a covered company, or the things they list here. So covered company could mean a parent company connection to anything, including a website, right? What happens if you're hosting with somebody that you don't know that person has connections with some other platform, or they make that the case? You see how this could ultimately be whatever they want. It says, or permits a user to create an account or profile to generate, share, view text, images, videos, real-time communications, or similar content. That's a covered company. Has more than a million monthly active users with respect to 2 or 3 months preceding the date of the relevant determination. So it's just so I don't even so basically it just seems like they're almost discussing just influence, like just general reach. Enables 1 or more users to generate, distribute content. Yeah, again, other uses of the website. Immersive technology. Bottom line being is it's a very broad category for what they consider a covered company that's like tangential to what we're ultimately getting at, as long as it draws back to the same foreign adversary assumption in many cases. Now it says foreign adversary controlled application, what that means. And again, it says a website, desktop application, mobile application, augmented, immersive technology, application that is operated directly or indirectly, including through a parent company, subsidiary, or affiliate by ByteDance, TikTok, right? And this is just about the foreign adversary controlled application. Remember, there's even exceptions to that when it gets into the, as it says down here, direction or control of foreign person or the covered company, right? This is just a specific about the foreign adversary controlled application. Any ByteDance connected thing, TikTok connected, a subsidiary or a successor to an entity identified in clause 1 or 2 that is controlled by a foreign adversary, an entity owned or controlled directly or indirectly by an entity identified in those clauses. And then it says a covered company. So that changes it right there. So now we're past the idea of TikTok or ByteDance, right? That was A. Now it's B. Back to this, saying these foreign adversary controlled applications, it says that it is one that is operated directly or indirectly by a covered company, right? So it skips right past the TikTok part of it. That's one side of it. That is controlled by a foreign adversary and that is determined by the president to persist a significant threat, a significant threat to the national security of the United States. So it can get convoluted. It's designed to be that way. But if you follow the logic here, my point is that you skip all this middle part. You can argue based on what they wrote that you could be a covered company, which means this flimsy definition right up here that they argue is simply influenced by some kind of foreign entity or even an affiliate. And then because Biden deems it to be a significant threat. So I can logically argue that could be literally anything, should they want that to be the case. Now, you could argue I'm reading too much into it. I don't think that's the case. I think that they're very aware that we go through with a fine-tooth comb. Now, qualified divestiture means the term qualified divestiture means a divestiture or similar transaction that the president determines through an interagency process would result in the relevant foreign agency's controlled application no longer being controlled by a foreign adversary. All that really means is the U.S. government gets to say, we're good with that. Right? So as long as we're good with who owns it, nobody has a problem. Please keep propagandizing the way we want you to. That's how I read it. Now here is actually, and I'm not familiar with the platform. I just looked this up on the Twitter search and I found this clip. Now they put stuff behind it. I think I can't even speak for if the translation in Arabic is correct. It's just about the audio. I just wanted to grab this because this audio has been confirmed. You guys have seen it. We've talked about it more than once. I wanted you to play the full version where he discusses the idea of the spies. This is Greenblatt on audio that he wasn't aware was released.
But I also want to point out that we have a major generational problem. All the polling I've seen, ADL's polling, ICC's polling, independent polling, suggests this is not a left-right gap, folks. The issue in the United States of support for Israel is not left and right. It is young and old.
And how long have I been telling you that about COVID, about any of this stuff? They're so desperate to push it into a left-right paradigm because that's how they control you. Shouldn't be surprising. The two-party illusion. We've been harping on this every day for the last 10 years. The point is that they need you to see it that way. It's not. COVID wasn't like that. None of this is. But of course, you get the screamers on the right that want to make it seem like only the crazy lefties support the bad Hamas. But that's how they keep people afraid to take a logical position and realize that there's both left and right people that have a soul and a brain and a heart and can recognize genocide when they see it.
And the numbers of young people who think that Hamas's, massacre was justified is shockingly and terrifyingly high. And so we really have a TikTok problem, a Gen Z problem.
So you hear what he's saying. He's not claiming China's manipulating it or the algorithm's lying. He knows that they think that, and TikTok was simply allowing them to express that. And that's a problem for them. So doesn't that seem to suggest the other platforms are in some way at least influenced? Yes.
That our community needs to put the same brains that gave us Taglit, the same brains that gave us all these other amazing innovations, need to put our energy toward this, fast. Because again, we've been chasing this left-right divide. It's the wrong game. The real game is the next generation. And the Hamas and their accomplices, the useful idiots in the West, are falling in line in ways that are terrifying. Last thing I'll just say, we saw a dramatic change in the language of the activists here in America on October the 8th. The language of groups that we've long tracked, who've long been problematic, like Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voices for Peace.
Ah, right. Jewish Voices for Peace. There was a coordinated effort to call them not Jewish and call them, secret, whatever it is, to denigrate them as Jews because they don't toe the line for Zionism.
They flipped like this and went to Iranian propaganda.
Not even
The
close.
language I could show you from their toolkits, because our analysts are in their groups.
Look at that. Doesn't that alarm anybody? Their analysts are in their groups. That's no way to misunderstand that. They've got spies secretly pretending to be part of groups as a anti-defamation league. Literally groups that are fighting. Their name is Jews for Peace. They're literally screaming for ceasefire, and you have people in there tracking them secretly. And the point is, this is a group that is meant to be about stopping the violence and racism, and these are groups calling for the same damn thing. But the problem is, that's not actually what they're fighting for. They're fighting for Zionist agendas, for censorship about people calling out Israel's crimes. Very clear. We just did an entire show about ADL being provably caught faking Nazi marches in the 70s, literally using Mordecai Levy, who was at the time, it was the Jewish Defense League, which was part of the ADL at the time, pretending to be a Nazi in Chicago, in Atlanta, I think it was Atlanta. The point is, that's what this entity really is. And on top of that, if you recognize an entity that's pretending to be an American group that is literally spying on American activist groups for a foreign country, that should be alarming as hell. Can you imagine what they would say if it was a Chinese group?
We saw this again on October the 8th. It was that fast. Like, the language in their toolkits was all about the Zionist entity and lots of other language that we recognized from Iranian propaganda.
Is that what it is? I mean, think about how desperate that is. The moment we start recognizing for the first time that it's actually a Zionist agenda, and finally people start seeing it, calling it out, showing other people, and you make it about Iranian propaganda, that's as stupid as claiming that the fact that our government was lying to us became Russian propaganda, even though it was true, and even though they knew it was true, we acknowledge it was true, the truth was Russian propaganda. That was actually what was said. Same stupid thing here.
We think there's something more to this that's below the waterline. It's the young generation we need to be focusing energy on. There's something happening with Iran and how it's now their propaganda and their language and their tactics seem to be bleeding into the American kind of activist space in ways that are very different than NIAC and very, very problematic.
Now, you should definitely care about whether Iran, for example, is influencing what you think in some way or shape or form, even if that is the truth, which it is. I mean, what we're talking about is the obvious, provable historic reality. I personally don't think that's Iran propaganda causing us to, certainly not me. I'm doing research. I'm finding source material and documents and doing my research about it and discussing the facts I can prove. It's nothing to do with what TikTok said that day, right? But at the end of the day, even if it's the truth and you find out that's some kind of a push, we should care about that, right? That's the same point. Now, here are some engagement in Congress about this. I showed one of them already, but Brent Circus just shared this. And 2 weeks ago, the ADL said Israel has a TikTok problem. We just played that for you. Today, the House passed, and today was March 13th, yesterday. Today, the House passed a bill that bans TikTok, or, that's what it's being framed as, and I agree. The bill claims to be protecting Americans from undue Chinese influence. So naturally, it's the product of it's the product of undue Israeli influence. It's kind of being facetious, but ultimately not. Now, this is a clip, and it seems to say part 3. I just want to play you this one and the one we saw from before, where it was, what's his name again? I'm blanking on this guy's name. I hate these people aren't important enough for me to remember. You guys all know Mr. Politician here.
Not available in mainland China. We have moved the data into an American cloud infrastructure.
TikTok is controlled by ByteDance, which is subject to this law. Now, you said earlier, and I wrote this down, we have not been asked for any data by the Chinese government, and we have never provided it. I'm going to tell you, and I told this when you and I met last week in my office, I do not believe you.
Don't you love that? So that right there, that's an important thing to think about. Now, he could be right. We should question whether that guy could be lying. But why is it that we end up going, especially from the right side of this conversation, that is the case, right? So he's not saying I have evidence to that effect. He's saying I don't believe you. And he's going, I haven't sent any information to China and they haven't asked for it, which I find hard to believe. But either way, when that's all we have in front of us and it ends up being a statement from a politician that goes, liar, it's the same thing I was just discussing. If that's the point we're at, we should go, well, we don't know then. The guy who owns it claims it, and we should ask, I would ask him, prove that. Prove to me that you haven't. And again, they have sent information that they just go, we don't agree with you. We disagree. We don't believe what you're showing us. So it ultimately comes down to evidence, whether you think it's falsified or not, versus them just going, no, narrative. And it very well may be the truth. But why do we as Americans lean into the, I want my news served up just the way I like it? Here's what I think. I want to find the guy saying that. Shouldn't it be based on facts?
And I'll tell you, the American people don't either. If you look at what is on TikTok in China, you are promoting to kids science and math videos, educational videos, and you limit the amount of time kids can be on TikTok. In the United States, you are promoting to kids self-harm videos and anti-Israel propaganda.
There it is.
Why?
Now, why is that? Is that what's happening? Certainly could be. Cruz, thank you. Certainly could be. Or is it just the fact that people in China search for different things? I mean, is that not also possible? Right? I mean, we could. Twitter and Facebook are also very different. Are we accusing the owners of doing that? Certainly could be. My point is, these are all subjective claims. It could be just the case that people in this country are being aggressively manipulated by a broken government and a completely extremist, mindless mainstream media that drives them to radicalize, that drives them to attack each other, that drives them to justify murder and genocide around the world. And just maybe that's causing them to drive to self-harm, or the antidepressants you're shoving down their throats. Maybe that's causing a problem that doesn't have the same issue over there. Who knows? Obviously, all those things play a factor, but it also could just be that China is, in fact, manipulating it. But I just get so frustrated that we just lean in to these statements that are completely partisan minded.
Why is there such a dramatic difference?
Senator, that is just not accurate. There's
not a difference between what kids see in China and what kids see here?
Senator, TikTok is not available in China. It's a separate experience.
And that's a point that he always says right there, that it's a different company in general. That's not the same thing. It's completely different. And they just don't like that answer and just move past it. Shouldn't we engage? Shouldn't we lean into that a little bit and go, well, what do you mean? Why is it different? What, is it a different company entirely? It's so clear to me that these people, Cruz and the rest of them, they're not interested in any real truth here. They're interested in you, just like everything else they're engaged with, using this as a moment to use it politically for their benefit, or for the benefit of a larger agenda, or for Israel's that kind of a larger agenda. That's what I think. They don't really care about stopping something. It's about using this for their benefit. That's why you skip past things like that. Now, here's another one. Now, this one was Justin Bargona. I've shared this clip before, and then I'll read you what Glenn Greenwald had to say about it. And this one is bad. This is the one I made fun of a while back. I mean, again, you could very well argue that he's lying, I think, and we all know it, but it's a bad look for him to just keep pressing this when there's no evidence. It's just like his hope that you're going to catch him in some gotcha moment, which, again, that's all this is really about. He wants his right-wing followers to go, yeah, give it to the mean China bad guy that we don't actually know for sure is a China bad guy.
He then had a lawsuit and it was overturned. I can't remember the details.
It's
another
company. The Biden administration that reversed those sanctions, just like, by the way, they reversed the terrorist designation on the Houthis in Yemen. How's that working out for them? But it was...
Yeah, thing like that. This is no bearing on the conversation. He's just trying to throw in little gotcha moments. And by the way, we're talking about the Ansarallah movement, and we're talking about the idea that they were illegitimately labeled as terrorists, and we're now doing it again because it's useful for Israel, right? But even the way his demeanor is in this, you can tell that he's like, it's almost like this, what's the right word for it? Kind of just a blithe disregard. Like what it's almost, he knows what you're about to say is a lie. We all know you're lying. Just get to the, like, that's kind of the feeling you get from this guy.
Sanctioned as a Chinese communist, the terrorist designation on the Houthis in Yemen, how's that working out for them? But it was sanctioned as a Chinese communist military company. So you said today, as you often say, that you live in Singapore. Of what nation are you?
He's lying. He must be, right? Like that's insinuation right there. This is petty, lowbrow politics. And by the way, it must be CCP because we sanctioned it for that. Must be. Because it's not like we've ever sanctioned, or rather this government has ever sanctioned anybody illegitimately. Because it's never happened before. Oops, dang it. Yeah, cocky, condescending. Exactly.
You said today, as you often say, that you live in Singapore. Of what nation are you a citizen?
Singapore.
Are you a citizen of any other nation?
No, Senator.
Have you ever applied for Chinese citizenship?
Senator, I served my nation in Singapore. No, I did not.
Do you have a Singaporean passport?
Yes, and I served my military for two and a half years in Singapore.
Do you have any other passports from any other nations?
No, Senator.
Your wife is an American citizen. Your children are American citizens.
That's correct.
Have you ever applied for American citizenship?
No, not yet.
So right there, wouldn't you seem to suggest that doesn't seem to suggest that he's leaning far more into the United States side of things than China? It could mean it's all because he's a spy. It could mean anything, right? But at what point do we stand back and just acknowledge the facts in front of us we can prove and what's conjecture and subjective narrative, right? And by the way, look at this very troubled person sitting next to Mr. Cotton here. Oh, sorry, I thought it was Holly. It's Cotton, excuse me. I just think it's funny, the guy sitting behind him. Maybe the kind of person you hire to make yourself feel smart.
Okay. Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again,
Okay.
I'm Singaporean.
Let me ask you some hopefully simple questions. You said earlier, in response to a question,
Embarrassing.
that what happened at Tiananmen Square in June of 1989 was a massive protest. Did anything else happen in Tiananmen Square?
I mean, this is actually not, I don't even think this guy he's not as smart as he even thinks he is. He thinks he's being really savvy and manipulative, and I'm going to get him caught in this thing. It's embarrassing. It actually is hard. It makes me feel uncomfortable to watch this. Like, so it was a protest. Just because this is like saying you didn't condemn it the right way. You're supposed to stand up and say, I condemn it this way, and Trump didn't do it the right way. These are meaningless things. You could argue that him saying it was a protest secretly means he supports the massacre of China, but that'd be a really dumb assumption, wouldn't it? That you could mean 1,000 other things. That he also meant it was something, was a protest and it was a massacre, which, by the way, is exactly what he says. It's just so painful.
Yes, I think it's well documented. There was a massacre.
There was the indiscriminate slaughter of hundreds or...
Yeah, that's what he just said, man. He probably didn't think he was going to say it, so he wanted to say it afterward and be like, no, it was oh, you did say it. That's what I feel anyway.
Protests. Did anything else happen in Tiananmen Square?
Yes, I think it's well documented. There was a massacre.
There was the indiscriminate slaughter of hundreds or thousands of Chinese citizens.
That's what he said.
Do you agree with the Trump administration and the Biden administration that the Chinese government is committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Senator, I've said this before. I think it's really important that anyone who cares about this topic or any topic can freely express themselves on TikTok.
It's a very simple...
Think about so now this is aged terribly, by the way, because now we're at a point where everyone seems to be very, very aware that term has a very specific metric that needs to be met. So let's pretend that Cotton has actually done that. Have you gone through the actual genocide metrics and met the genocide convention and like in the meeting the data points for the genocide convention? Have you done your due diligence and found out whether or not there's intent? Have you documented whether or not there's actual, it's just so frustrating that they've done this constantly. Russia is committing genocide. China is committing genocide. The moment that we see one of the most obvious genocides in the history, we're going, we're not sure, and we can't prove this, and there's specifics that need to be met. It just shows you how gross these people are, like at a core value, that you would happily call something genocide when you can't prove that, but ignore a real genocide because politically it's not something you want to be leaning into. Those are sociopaths, guys. That's disgusting.
Question that unites both parties in our country and governments around the world is the Chinese government committing genocide against the Uyghur people.
Senator, anyone, including, you can come into TikTok and talk about this topic.
I'm asking you,
or any topic that matters to you.
You are a worldly, cosmopolitan, well-educated man who's expressed many opinions on many topics.
It's a final attempt at a gotcha moment because he failed at every other one. Because the reality is, it is a convoluted conversation. It's not as simple as a yes or a no, and we've talked about this. It's a complete manipulation of the situation. The idea is you can prove that even Israeli involvement, which I've done the show on this, I went into this in depth, of flooding radical Muslims in this country in order to achieve a certain end, both with involvement of the United States. Same thing they do in Syria and other places. We can prove this. But I can also prove that China has treated these people, whether they are terrorists or not, which matters because they're human beings, in ways that you would argue are human rights violations. Does that meet the level of genocide? Not in any way that I can prove. But see, it's not as simple as going yes or no, because if you say no, they're going to say you're completely blindly siding with China, which is not even the truth. But if you say yes, you're completely sweeping aside an entire nuanced conversation to say something that isn't even true. But that's how they work you into that. It's like saying, do you condemn Hamas in the midst of a genocide taking place?
Is the Chinese government committing genocide against the Uyghur people?
Actually, Senator, I talk mainly about my company, and I'm here to talk about what TikTok does.
Yes or no? You're here to give testimony that's truthful and honest and complete.
God, he's so gross.
Let me ask you this. Joe Biden last year said that Xi Jinping was a dictator. Do you agree with Joe Biden? Is Xi Jinping a dictator?
Senator, I'm not going to comment on any world leaders.
What?
I mean, it's such a stupid game he's playing, right? I mean, it goes on. It's embarrassing. He's making a mockery of something that is already pretty widely seen as a joke. Doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be. That's because of people like him. Here's what Glenn had to say. I agree. Tom Cotton is a complete imbecile, as this clip vividly demonstrates, and both parties' fear-mongering over TikTok is grounded in dumb innuendo. There's far more evidence they're censoring for the U.S. government than China. Yeah, shocking, I know. He says this is all more about more government control over social media. 100%. We repeatedly examined claims that TikTok is controlled by China. This is Glenn Greenwald saying this. It's false. Chu is a capitalist who went to London School of Economics and then Goldman Sachs. They already once tried to obtain massive powers under the guise of fighting TikTok. It's not the first time. We've already talked about this. He posted his tweet down here talking about it. He says that these threats to ban TikTok from both Biden and the GOP, whenever there's a partisan agreement, we should be very attentive to that, are driven by two motives, he says, in his opinion. To force them to censor more for the U.S. security state to stay in the United States, 100%. Two, to centralize control of social media in the hands of a big tech they control. Yeah, pretty simple, I think. The claims that China is using TikTok to spy on Americans is even dumber. He says there's no evidence for it. TikTok offered to keep all data under U.S. control. And most importantly, DHS and NSA showed you can just buy all this invasive data on the open market. They're manufacturing this, guys. We have to see that by now. And that's not to say that China's not spying on you or other platforms are doing the same. It's probably all happening. But what they're using here is a game. And it's, as always, a partisan manipulation. That's what it comes down to. And you're going to have the people screaming on one side or the other to try to drive you into the same direction for both. Just a last note on censorship. I thought this was interesting on Twitter. They put this on my last episode, which a sensitive content warning, right? On the other platform, Facebook and Instagram, they say I'm supporting a terrorist organization. Over here, it's a sensitive content. And they're not even talking about the images here. The point is that you could, even if they are, I can show you 100 things in the next 10 seconds on Twitter right now that are graphic. That image of the child being rolled over with a tank and being smashed was completely uncensored. And last time I checked, it still was. And yet they're using warnings. It's all censorship, guys. It's about suppressing content right now that is actively showing you the reality of something that is fundamental to the control over your life, the Zionist influence. Wild. Now, let's talk about the start in the conversation of Israel, the right of return. I think this is a very powerful and important conversation that people need to take to heart, because this is the crux of the situation, really. This comes down to a lot of other situations that have later happened in the Middle East because of Israel and because of this situation and the illegitimate, rather criminal engagement to maintain their control over this exact situation. And that includes, let's not forget that if you actually take a second to look into the Greater Israel Project, which is not secret, it openly includes areas of Saudi Arabia, of Egypt, of Jordan, of all sorts of areas. And yet we're being told that other countries want to take over the world. Russia wants to secretly march away and take over everything else, even though there's literally zero indication for that, while the U.S. has been doing it for 50, 60, 100 years. It's insulting to your intelligence. And all of this has to do with the Zionist agenda. Now, going back to the Zionist organization before Israel became Israel, which was stolen from Palestinian land, which, by the way, I'll reiterate here, not just Gaza and the West Bank. And I've actually gotten into conversations about this with people that are very much in the same mindset about what's going on today and the Zionist agenda. But yet I bring up the idea that even the UN has maintained that the entire area is occupied Palestine, and they push back on that. And I just think it's interesting because I'll prove it to you yet again in this document. But this is a reiteration. This is on 1978, United Nations. The right of return of the Palestinian people. Now, this is kind of a study overview of a lot of the conversations up until now, now being 1978. And I want to read through to you some of the things they say in the opening, and then a couple of things I think. No, it looks like just the opening. I forgot. That's right. I opened up oh, wait, no. Yeah, there is one more thing. I'm glad I didn't forget that. Okay, so the opening here. Now, again, prefaced, really, this is about the idea in any situation, in a war, or like, let's just say in a legitimate sense, which I have a hard time even saying legitimate war in general, but let's just say as international law views it, you have a war. And that war necessitates, and again, let's act as if all this is with good intentions, even though that's not what's happening today, and that people are acting in good faith. That in a war, you end up moving into certain areas, right? And during that time, the civilians will flee out of the way of their own accord, not being driven and mass displaced like we're seeing in Palestine. But I'm talking about like a war where you're going after different bad guys and taking careful care to not hurt civilians like any other normal war. Really, I shouldn't even say that, but how it should be anyway. And you end up sort of taking area, moving away, getting rid of the bad guys you're fighting. Now that is considered occupied, not illegally, but occupied. And it may necessitate doing so to make sure X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. You can see how these things are easily being manipulated today. My point is, at the end of that conflict, you're supposed to move away from that occupied territory and allow the right of return. That's what this is. Now, what's happened is Israel has failed to do that in the very beginning. And then again in 1967, when an agreement was made, which they agreed to, and have still ever since yet to allow the right of return, always citing their violence, their desire to kill and to terrorist acts and all these things as the justification for not doing it. And there's a specific clause about it, right? To the idea that they can't let them return if they're only going to be violent to their neighbors, right? But the illusion in all of this is that they have wanted that. This goes right back to the open discussed point now, which wasn't then, which is that Israel has funded elements like Hamas in order to use them as justifications for not allowing that to happen. That's public knowledge today. Even though it gets disputed in Zionist circles, even Haaretz wrote about it, right? In order to make sure they did not get a two-state solution, which was what they agreed to. So that's Israel openly signing on to an agreement for a two-state solution in 1967, and then just never allowing it to happen because of the groups they funded to be violent. Very, very interesting. Now, here's what it says. In cases where persons had been forced to leave their country, and it's in a broad sense, because of force majeure, such as war, the right of return could not be questioned. So natural was this principle considered, so axiomatic, a corollary to the fundamental considered self-evident. Only when large groups might have been displaced from their homes would it assume a collective dimension. And the idea being that the right, it's normally about an individual, right? But when mass displacement happens, that's when it becomes a collective concept. But it is rare, it says, that the right of return should be invoked on a national scale, that there should be a situation where the greater part of an entire nation should be uprooted from its land, be exiled, and then be denied the right to return. In our times, a notable case in this dimension is that of the Palestinian people, forced to flee their ancestral land by reason of military and political action, and then to find the right of return denied them on political and legal grounds. That's the first point. It gets even more specific, but just so you understand what it's saying. The entire nation should be uprooted from its land. Right. So that's very clear. And so what they're saying is the entirety of Israel is Palestine. Which, by the way, this is one of those points I made in the beginning, how infuriating it is that we have to keep making these points, even though it's the most provable. Again, you got lots of provable information, and then you've got a bunch of constructed narratives and talking points and propaganda, with most of it being things that if you even barely dig into, you find out that it's rooted in narrative and not actual historical document. And then they say specifically the Palestinian people. Now it says, in the case of the Palestinian people, the individual or personal right of return assumes a special significance for without its restoration, the exercise of the collective or national right of self-determination, itself guaranteed by a variety of international instruments, becomes impossible. And they'll get into it in this document, but this is where UNRWA came into play. The idea being that this group was set up in order to maintain records of this necessity. And that, as it says, without the right of return, self-determination becomes impossible. So to make this about somehow the idea being that right of return means killing all the Jews or that Israel can't exist, this is a complete manufactured reality. You can make up whatever thing you think this ultimately means. It's simply international law. The reality being that by not allowing them to come back to their territory, you're guaranteeing they don't have self-determination, not the other way around. It's not choices they've made. Now, because this has been so convoluted, lied about, and conflated over the years, people don't even know this stuff. But now, again, 67 forward, the argument became that, well, two-state solution, which still was agreed upon by the Palestinian side and Israel, by the way, even though they never had any intentions of doing it. And the point was that was Palestinian side acknowledging, yes, fine, they can have that territory as long as we get something that's ours, of our own, that we control, that have no influence of Israel. But that didn't happen. And that would have been to them the right of return, to go back to that part of it, even though they were giving up something else. So this game they play, but look, there's people in Israel that think that no Palestinians should exist. There's people in Palestine that argue that there should not be zero place for Israel and Palestine should have all their land back, which, by the way, to be clear, is actually the legal reality. But they have foregone that to argue that they want peace, which is a two-state solution. So that's them giving something up that's theirs provably to make peace. My point is that does exist. There's somebody out there that wants all of it to go back to the way it should be, and they're actually right in saying that. But most of the Palestinian resistance, or at large, want what they agreed to then. It's been Israel that has not allowed that, and that is the right of return being denied. Not for all of Israel, but just for that agreement. My point is, we'll get to a video next where they're trying to pretend that the right of return means that they want to kill everybody. It's just this very insulting, perverse inversion of reality. Now, it says the Palestinian people have struggled to regain this right since 1947. See, this is the point. This is when this is the occupation, guys. Not just Gaza, not just West Bank, not just 67 forward, but clearly the entirety. The Palestinian people have struggled to regain the right of return since 1947, when the United Nations became involved in the Palestine issue, and recommended the partition of Palestine into two states. Now, this is before 67. This is right in the beginning. One Palestinian Arab and another Jewish. While Israel declared independence in May of 1948, specifically on the basis of that partition resolution, says war and politics prevented the Palestinian Arab state envisioned in the resolution from coming into existence. See, but this is where the beginning of the problem was. I'm not talking about the beginning of the problem. Started with the illegal occupation of Palestine and the murder of Palestinians. But this is where the idea, like the legal two-state, or rather just the occupation issue, really kind of got enshrined. Is the idea is they made an agreement. Even though the point is that this is largely this was forced in by international entities with largely no concern for Palestinians, but nonetheless, there was at least the acknowledgement that they would have something, and there would be another thing over here for Israel, which became Israel. They then began the idea that they were the ones that wouldn't allow it to happen. This is despite the fact that later the Nakba happened, the actual ethnic cleansing of hundreds of thousands of people, murdering more than I remember. The number is it's horrifying. I don't want to misquote it. I'm trying to remember the exact number, but it is gigantic. And then there was another one after that. And the idea being that this is the entity that is the problem while you are ethnically cleansing the Palestinian people. War and politics. But there's been many times over the years where there has been a genuine interest to solve this, and every single time the Israeli government has made sure it wouldn't happen. You could, despite the people that want to push back on that statement, you could prove this. Netanyahu's been caught on the record saying these things about the Oslo Accords, making sure they would never agree, funding Hamas to make sure that you could use Hamas to blame them for being violent. Haaretz has covered that. So, those points alone should show you that they don't want what they pretend that they do, while pretending that they're the ones being violent all the way back then. Now it says instead, the first great exodus of Palestinians fleeing from their homeland took place in 1948. Right? So they agree to give half of the land away and then decide to kick all the Palestinians out. That's what happened. Which, by the way, was illegal. Even at that time, it was in violation of the resolution. They've never cared about these international resolutions. The Zionists, obviously, because this isn't even Israel this time. And the second great wave followed in 67. From then on, the majority of the Palestinian people have been in exile. So this is where we get to the right of return concept, right? So from that point forward, the vast majority of Palestinians, both in occupied Palestine and the rest of the world, are refugees, which is why UNRWA was created. And they are unable to return to their country, despite the right of those wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors in Palestine, having been endorsed repeatedly by the General Assembly since 1948. So the only thing stopping this is Israel. Now you realize what you're actually stopping are these people coming back to live in, like, here's a better way to put it. Even if you want to pretend that people are being violent, the argument is ultimately that you have never given up that occupied territory. So it's a different conversation. There's two conversations there. One would be allowing people to come back and that they might be violent, so we can't allow that, which becomes completely subjective, and that's how they've abused the situation. But the first is actually is no longer occupying the territory and allowing the territory to be open to even be able to go back to. They have never allowed that. Israel has never actually allowed that, and even since then, as we all know, continued to make more settlements, continued to occupy more of these areas. Illegal from every sense in every possible way you look at it. It's amazing. We even have to debate this stuff. It says, from then on, unable to return, despite their wish to go home, to live at peace with their neighbors in Palestine, having been endorsed repeatedly. Now, it says for 2 decades, from 1953 all the way to 1979, the Palestinian issue was treated essentially as a refugee problem, which was largely due to the illusion that was presented around it and the politics that allowed people not to know that this was an ethnic cleansing genocide. They pretended it's just a bunch of refugees. The same thing they kind of did with the Syrian situation, where we're not really addressing why it's happening. We just got to move them here, move them there. They're trying to do the same thing right now with Palestinians. Too many people are paying attention. But it says eventually in 1974, they saw through it. The United Nations General Assembly explicitly recognized that Palestinian people were entitled to self-determination in accordance with the United Nations Charter and to reaffirm their inalienable right of return. So that was when it started to flow the other way. When they go, wait a minute, we've just been calling them refugees all this time. We're completely disregarding that they have a right to return. It's international law. They know that. The Fourth Geneva Convention. That, this is something we've discussed many times from modern understanding. The Fourth Geneva Convention, international law, argues that an occupied territory has the right to armed rebellion against military targets. Right. So at this point, we're talking about some kind of an, amicable situation. But when you've continued to never remove yourself from the occupied situation and maintained it, then this is what people discuss why you're going to drive legal acts of armed resistance, which they call terrorism. And it says, from then on, the Palestinian question was no longer only of a refugee problem, but a crucial political issue acknowledged by the assembly, which people pretend we just ignore today. It didn't happen, as a lying at the heart of the Middle East as issue or problem. So let me read that again so it's clear. The point is that this is the right of return is what they're saying. When they realized it wasn't just refugee problem, but actually the right of return, they realized it was the crucial political issue lying at the heart of the Middle East problem. This is in 1974. Realizing that the reason this is a problem, the reason this situation is getting worse day by day is because they're refusing to allow the Palestinian people the right of return. And all these other Arab nations are infuriated about it. And that's ever since been this sticking issue. That is the conversation that most Americans don't even understand. Robert's written about it many, many times. So if you could really argue that the whole Middle East issues, peace in the Middle East, all stems back to the illegal institution, the illegal beginnings of the Zionist state and their refusal, even when offered a state that they can have, to give something back to the Palestinians from which they stole it from. It says there is increasingly recognition in the world opinion, and in, again, 1978, that any settlement of the Middle East dispute will not be possible without the restoration to the Palestinian people of their inherent and inalienable rights of the right to return. So simply saying that we won't be able to solve this until you give them their land back. And guess what? They never did. And now we've gone so far past it with so many political manipulations of people like Cotton and the rest of them muddying the waters with nonsensical things they push and propaganda because they're being lobbied to do so. And most people don't even know about this. Don't even know that that's where it got left. And which ever since then, they've just been lying and lying and lying and suppressing the Palestinian conversation and putting them in an open air prison. We don't even hear what they have to say until today. So going off of that conversation, I'm glad that was highlighted there. Here's a video I wanted to play. This is from Palestinian Eve Network, just talking about it. And this is on June 21st, 2023. The 20th of June each year marks the World Refugee Day, which I didn't even know actually was approved by the UN in regard to the Palestinian issue.
20th of June each year marks the World Refugee Day, which was approved by the United Nations General Assembly in 2001. Palestinian refugees are persons whose normal place of residence was Palestine during the period June 1, 1946 to May 15, 1948, and who lost both home and means of livelihood as a result of the 1948 Nakba. According to the Central Bureau of Statistics, more than 6.4 million Palestinian refugees registered in the records of the Relief and Works Agency are still suffering from asylum as a result of their forced displacement from their lands during the Nakba in 1948. The Palestinians use the term Nakba to refer to their ethnic cleansing by the Zionist Israeli gangs. Palestinian refugees are residing in 58 refugee camps scattered in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria.
That's actually interesting that people don't think about too, right? It's not just in Gaza. And this is the game that a lot of these Israeli propagandists play. Like, why are they all still refugees? Because they're pretending like they don't know the obvious, which is that they're still waiting for you to give them back their property or allow them the legal right of return, or at the very least, allow the two-state solution, which you pretend you're never going, you ever wanted in the first place, which isn't true. They've never wanted that. So, but it's not just these areas. This is a point that people often make. Look at the refugee camps in Jordan. It's a night and day. They live. They're in refugee camps, but it's literally comparing like a modern city look to what you're seeing in Gaza right now. Now, why is that? If you're blaming the Palestinians, it's both Palestinians. Then why is one over here in Jordan much nicer with running water and electricity versus over here? Why? I think you know why. Because the Zionist agenda has exposed their completely genocidal agenda against these people in particular.
The Gaza Strip,
and don't forget, they're bombing Syria all the time. There's refugee camps in Syria.
And the West Bank. About 500,000 Lebanon and Syria. The Gaza fighting in 58 refugee camps scattered in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. The Gaza Strip and the West Bank.
Weirdly, all places they're engaged with bombing. Interesting, isn't it? Maybe now ask why Egypt is so reluctant to help these Palestinian people, even though I'm not suggesting they even care. But it's obviously clear that if you end up helping Palestinians, you end up on the chopping block in the mind of Zionist government. Clearly. But 58 refugee camps, all because they refuse to allow the right of return.
About 500,000 Palestinians live in 12 camps in Syria. 270,000 live in 12 camps in Lebanon. More than 2 million refugees live in 10 camps in Jordan. 1.4 Palestinian refugees live in 8 camps in the Gaza Strip.
Million. Now ask yourself, if you lived here's the best way to think about it. Let's pretend that it's the United States. You're American, right? And whatever country, China, occupies the entire thing. And then you are fighting for your right to return to your area, to your home, right? And you've been put in a refugee camp in a foreign country. Or let's just even say on the outskirts, like you live in the, like a Gaza Strip type situation inside of California or whatever. Think about the argument here. That 20 years go by. And you're still hoping that you can go back to your land with your home and because you still have the key, which, by the way, there's a lot of that. Palestinians holding up the deed to the house and the key, even though they won't let them go back. And ask yourself, is it your fault for never deciding to go restart your life? Should that be the absolute, or should you be allowed to decide to demand what is legally yours and what is actually acknowledged by international law to be an absolute right that they're withholding from you? That's the idea today. They pretend like, look at all these people still living in refugee camps. That's their choice. They're choosing to live like that. It's just, this is why I'm always so grossed out by these conversations, because these people, it's not just that they're wrong. They know this stuff. They know. And I'm not talking about the average people in the IDF. I'm talking about the politicians. I'm talking about the propagandists. They're very aware of the right of return, which I'm going to get into next, which is why they're attacking this. It's public. They've actually stated it when they're in Knesset meetings that we have to get rid of all the records. We have to delete all of the right of return records because that's It's publicly stated. But then when we talk about it in a right-left paradigm in the US, it all comes down to racism and terrorism and all of our weird, clumsy, naive, childish talking points, which is the two-party illusion, not actually representative of most Americans. It's much more dumbed down. I think that's intentional. But that's the reality, that you're being treated as if you're choosing to maintain a situation, even though what are you supposed to do when you live in a refugee camp and don't have any money and don't have any way to move anywhere? You're supposed to take a chance and move your family to another insecure location? Like, you're being taken care of under the argument that you're going to be allowed to go back legally to your property. A year goes by, 10 years go by. Like, how long is it still it's never your fault. Like, this is what's just so insulting. And so bringing it back to this argument. Oh, hold on. What did I do? Oh, I think I just closed it. That was this one. The idea of all these refugee camps. That's what I was going to here. The idea, we just talked about this in regard to the lies and the manufactured agendas they've created around UNRWA. Now, I just talked about this on the 8th. Israel doubles down on multiple lies: Hamas rape allegations, UNRWA food aid lies. That's one I talk about in recently. Here's one I just went over in regard to the lies of UNRWA of the Hamas headquarters under UNRWA, all of which have been completely broken down as absolute lies, even by corporate media, which is staggering to me, but it's happening. This is the one we went over where UNRWA is Hamas was exposed as an Israeli operation. And Robert just wrote this one on the 29th of January. The West's defunding of UNRWA has nothing to do with October 7th. Let me quickly read what he wrote here for you. He says, to begin with, UNRWA is an organization that was set up by the United Nations to specifically provide aid and human development programs for the Palestinian refugee population. In the meantime is the point, like until they were allowed to go back to their homes, right? That were expelled from their lands by Zionist militias between 1947 and 1949 in what is known as the Nakba, or catastrophe. As per UN Resolution 194, so there's a number for you can specifically look up, the Palestinian refugees have a right under international law to return to their homelands. Not these refugee camps, they set them up elsewhere, not in Egypt, not in the Sinai Desert, but specifically theirs, whether or not Zionist governments agree with that. And the organization responsible for keeping track of those refugees is UNRWA. That really is the whole point here, that they're desperate to try to hide this narrative any further. Paperwork is problematic. It says UNRWA has registered nearly 6 million Palestinians as refugees and provides crucial aid to the refugee population, particularly inside of Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. Its aid programs in the refugee camps are one of the key pillars that are keeping the Palestinian refugees inside of the camps in Lebanese territory afloat, as the population there is mostly impoverished and are disadvantaged under Lebanese law due to their status as refugees. Now, is that their fault? To blame them for that situation is pretty disgusting, especially since they were illegally and violently uprooted, and then they never allowed the thing that is legally theirs to this very day. To even pretend like they chose this, to pretend like it's their fault they're in that position, is malicious, vindictive, criminal. In Gaza, roughly 80% of the population are registered refugees of UNRWA. And I would argue that's only because the other 20 have been born later and haven't been, they're nowhere to go return to other than with their family. So the point is, anybody there would have had the right to return in the beginning. And it says the majority have been displaced again and lost their homes due to Israel's ongoing assault on the besieged territory, which, by the way, just happened again. He's talking about post the first Nakba, second Nakba, but now past then, October 7th, these people have been displaced from their homes, then their tent, then their second tent, more than once. That just makes me so sad that so few people in powerful positions seem to care about that. At a time when Gaza is facing the worst ever humanitarian crisis and an Israeli-imposed famine, in which mainly children are the victims of death by starvation on a daily basis, the withdrawal of funds from the UN agency is tantamount to an act of collective punishment. Now he writes down here, Israel's been planning this all along. And it's easy to prove. On December 29th, the Times of Israel reported that a, quote, high-level classified Israeli Foreign Ministry report had detailed exactly how to push UNRWA out of post-war Gaza and help collapse the refugee issue. That's actually what this is discussing. And this is not like, these are things that I don't think are meant to be floated through Western media. To collapse the refugee issue is not what they're framing it as. That's what you're going to hear in their statements in internal discussions. They claim, oh, well, they're Hamas and they're part of the. Well, that's not what they're discussing here. And this is before those allegations began. At this time, I was still the one going, it's December 2023. I'm still the one going, they're not even talking about UN and they're bombing their locations. Clearly, they caught wind of the fact that people were highlighting and putting these things together and suddenly manufactured the UNRWA is Hamas narrative. Now, here's what it says. This is from the Times of Israel piece before this. According to the report, the document recommends 3 stages to the move. The first involves a comprehensive report on alleged UNRWA cooperation with Hamas. That's how they wrote that. With rules, which rules Gaza and the entanglement of the UN body that provides welfare and humanitarian services for Palestinian refugees from 1948 to 67. Wars and, I've read that wrong. For Palestinian refugees from the 1948 and 1967 wars and their descendants with the terror group. It says the next stage would see reduced UNRWA operations in the Palestinian enclave, while they're starving them, amid a search for a different organization to provide education and welfare services, which they'll never do. In the third stage, according to the report, all of UNRWA's duties will be transferred to the body governing Gaza following the war. We're not even getting into this is just about manufacturing their removal and however they can do that, which, by the way, is why we now know they have still yet to provide any evidence to prove the things they've said, even according to the U.S. at this point, in regard to the UNRWA is Hamas. Now, here is what Muhammad Shihada points out. And actually, if you wanted to read this, I'm sure we linked it in here, because that's what we do. Here's the article itself, so you can read it for yourself. The document recommends 3 stages to the move. It's all right there. As it says, the first involves comprehensive report on alleged UNRWA cooperation with Hamas. Now, why would they write it that way? Wouldn't it be proven because they all know that? No, guys, because this is a plan. It has nothing to do with whether it's true or not. It's an agenda. It's a propaganda plan. And he wrote it down, telling you, he just highlighting the same thing. Step 1, smear UNRWA. Step 2, reduce operations in Gaza. 3, replace it with something else. And destroy all the records, which is the ultimate point. Now, here is one of their representatives. Her name, here's her actual account. Zionist. By her own admission, I'd be pretty embarrassed to say that today. Openly racist ideology. Lens Veritas says, Israeli influencer, author, and open Zionist, speaking in front of the Knesset, says openly, and I've played this before, and it's got subtitles, and this was posted on Israeli media, so it's very real. UNRWA must close completely, no replacement. Palestinian refugee claims are false. They have no right of return. Erase UNRWA refugee records. So you see, this even you can't say all 4 of those things, which she does, and then pretend like she doesn't know. Like, to be clear, she's not saying there is no right of return. She's saying they don't get a right of return, and then erase the records that prove they have a right of return. So this is a public conversation about destroying evidence, about manufacturing the reality that stops these people from what is legally theirs because God said we get this, or whatever the mindset is to them, or Zionist hate Palestinians, doesn't matter. The point is, we're acknowledging we're breaking the law because we don't care about what anybody else thinks in the law, international law. We can do what we want because we're a Zionist government. Of course, that's what I'm putting on at the end. But that is what's happening here. Publicly discussing, and it's Inat Wilf, apparently. But here, even more interesting, this is from March 12th, 2024. Here's what she just wrote. This is kind of crazy. I can't confirm that this is, in fact, what's happening in northern Gaza, but realize this is somebody who has been invested in this conversation, speaking to Knesset, a proud Zionist, about trying to accomplish this agenda about removing UNRWA and removing their records about the right of return. Get this. She says, this is the only reasonable basis. Well, first of all, this is a tweet saying what we need to do is break it up between northern Gaza and southern Gaza and then occupy all of northern Gaza and let them live in southern Gaza. But pretending that's not occupation. Like, that's the 2-state solution. Like, imagine pretending further occupying Gaza is a 2-state solution and maintaining southern Gaza as the same thing that was Gaza before it, a controlled open-air prison with less territory, but that's a 2-state solution. That's not a joke. That's literally what this person is arguing. Her point is, this is the only reasonable basis for Israel to act against Gaza. The fake two-state solution. Then she says, the north is under full Israeli control, inhabited only by Palestinians who meet two conditions, she says. Right now, she's saying they have been deleted from UNRWA records as refugees. 2, they openly declare in their voice to the camera that they are not refugees anymore from Palestine, that they, quote, have no right of return, that they wish to live alongside the Jewish state and not in its place. Wow. I mean, this is like the first glimpse many people are going to get into the reality that this is like not just that we're differing of opinion, that we're getting an entire wholesale wag the dog presentation about what's actually happening while they are just high-fiving about murdering children, while they're literally high-fiving about surreptitiously. I mean, look, what they're pretending here, what they're claiming anyway, is that they're going out to people in Gaza, northern Gaza, people that are starving, while children are starving, and forcing them to renounce what is legally theirs on camera and delete the records from the thing they're claiming doesn't exist. Isn't that incredible? So the point is that obviously they all know that the right of return is what they're trying to erase. And now she's somehow, but this is all in Hebrew. Most Americans don't see this stuff. Most Western audience don't see this stuff. Openly admitting this. It's completely contrary to what we're hearing. That we're protecting the Palestinians, that we're just going after Hamas. That's it. We haven't even gone in. She's telling us they're literally going around and having videotapes going, Professor, you're not a refugee. For what? To what end? Are you going to pretend that under coercion you can force them to claim they're not a refugee? Or are you going to present that to some legal body? I mean, what is that even for? Either way, it really does show you that they are very aware that this is not about Hamas. This is not about anything other than destroying Palestine for the interest of a Zionist agenda. And they're literally forcing Palestinians to renounce what is legally theirs. It kind of blows me away. Now, here is the same woman speaking with an English language channel, trying to tell you what everything we just went through, the right of return means terrorism.
You're a former member of Knesset, and one of the issues that you took on is the issue of UNRWA and the perpetuation of the refugee issue with the Palestinians. Can you tell us a little about what is the issue there?
One of the things I find most amazing is that the biggest obstacle to peace is the least known. And I believe that UNRWA, which is the head of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, is the biggest obstacle to peace in the Middle East, certainly between Israelis and Palestinians.
Isn't that interesting? Do you know why she's saying that? Because they're all very aware. Like, you have to realize they're acutely aware of the UN dynamic going back to 1947. They're aware of the resolutions that they agreed to in 67. And the point is, you don't use that term. The argument is in multiple UN resolutions going back to the original that the only sticky point stopping peace in the Middle East is allowing the right of return. So what do? They go, the UNRWA group in and of itself is the only thing stopping peace in the Middle East. It's the inversion of reality. It's the opposite of what was enshrined in international law, because people seem to just go along with whatever the Israeli government tells them to say.
UNRWA is essentially a UN agency that is a thinly masked Palestinian political organization that perpetuates the idea that Israel and Zionism can be rolled back decades.
Nope. It enshrines the legal right. They have the right of return. And just because your Zionist agenda has populated the areas that they acknowledged and you signed was theirs does not mean you could pretend it never existed and now inverse the reality and pretend like they're trying to take from you what you made sure you never gave back to them. That's what happened.
And that the Palestinians who left during Israel's War of Independence
left. You see, this is a complete manufacture. The Nakba is not even up for debate. Plenty of Jewish historians or Israeli historians or any number have spoken about this stuff, Zionists and otherwise, even in positive lights. We can show you the oldest living reservist and people from that time glowingly talking about raping women and murdering children. It's not secret. It's all over the place. It's not even debatable. And you're going to pretend like these people willfully left, like you were going to have them willfully migrate to Egypt. It's just grotesque, the way that they, and my point is, she knows that she's lying.
and their descendants in perpetuity can one day return and reclaim that land and turn the clock back.
So again, if they signed the 67 agreement, which they did, they agreed to give them back and acknowledged it was theirs. They just don't care about that. And again, just invert it to make it seem like they're pretending to come back to something. I mean, I just showed you the document. We can literally show it. This is why the U.S. This is, by the way, why over the years they've increasingly UN is illegal. UN is anti-Semitic. Which, by the way, there's plenty of reasons we can all argue the UN is not something we should blindly follow or even should exist. But the point is, this one point is why they've gone after the UN and why the UN is pushed back in so many ways, because they pretend today the UN is Hamas. Why? Because what else are they going to say? Because the information is coming out. They are an illegal entity. And even the agreement they made that the Palestinians agreed to, they never really allowed.
The Palestinians have UNRWA, but every other refugee situation in the world, whether it be in Syria or Africa or Asia, is under the auspices of the UNHCR. What's the difference between the two UN bodies?
You're absolutely correct.
The manufactured conversation.
In the late 40s and 50s, when the United Nations was established and looked to take care of issues of refugees, they established a High Commissioner for Refugees that, you're right, takes care of all refugee situations in the world. UNRWA was established separately, initially not for any bad intention. People just thought it would be very temporary, that within several months, the Arab refugees from the war would be resettled in Arab countries and other countries and would be...
No. I mean, this is my point. This is either very ignorant or willful deception. They would be the right of return. That's exactly, like, this is the foundational point of UNRWA. It's in the discussion of its actual, it's documentation. You can't decouple the right of return from everything to pretend like they go back to Syria, go back to here. How is that returning? That's displacement. So all she's trying to do, and I can leave it there, is just very clearly conflate these conversations and act like, and I mean, she even just admitted it. They thought it'd be over very quickly and they'd be able to come back to the settlements. Oops. Yeah, because you never allowed that. Are you pretending they never wanted to? It's just so wild how clear all of this is. But thank God people are finally starting to pay attention. Here is a post from the BDS movement saying, in opening South Africa's case against Israel for Gaza genocide at the ICJ, Mr. Madonsela recognized the ongoing Nakba of Palestinians through Israel's colonialization, dispossession, displacement, fragmentation, and the denial of self-determination and the right of return. That needs to become more of a prominent talking point right now because it is very important and most people don't even know about it. And again, let's not forget, this is March 1st. And this has been acknowledged by Canada, by the United States. Israel has yet to provide evidence to back up their claims that UNRWA is Hamas or that they were involved with October 7th. They just keep stating new things. Here's another picture with their faces and an audio thing we can prove that they've lied about. Not even the corporate media is going along with it. Now, in other ways that they manipulate this, right? Not just ignoring their right of return, not just pretending like they don't have a right to go back to their property, right? But people are starting to catch on to that, right? So instead, they jump to other things they can try to manipulate. And I'm talking about the Zionist lobby and Zionist agenda conversation. Instead of pretending that they just don't have a right to go back, maybe you know that already, they just go, well, they're not even actually being killed. So there's not even really a risk. Nobody's actually being hurt. There is no famine, things like that, right? And one of those I keep showing you, which I'll just include again, it's all listed here, is the argument that these numbers you're hearing aren't true. And it's these kind of blatantly obvious things that are so infuriating. Every day, I see the same people saying the same thing over and over, even though we post them underneath them and they see it, that one of the most absurd things he says about the ongoing conflict is basically that people listen to Hamas numbers. And it's just, here's Times of Israel. The IDF believes the overall numbers by Hamas are fairly accurate. I posted the Lancet study that shows that they're not inflated. Here's the Gaza Health. I'll come back to that one. Here is the post from an Israeli platform. Same thing. The army checked and found that their numbers are accurate. Here was Vice News. Israeli intelligence even deemed their numbers to be accurate. It's just so, it's not that I'm blindly following what that is saying. It's what the IDF told us. So the IDF literally speaks up and says those numbers are mostly accurate. Not one of them, not two of them. Intelligence, the army, they did. Guys, it's provable. Read the documentation, look at the source material. But what's hilarious is this is what people post, which if you take the time to read it, it's embarrassing. By the way, Table Mag or Tablet or whatever this is, it's just a tabloid as far as I'm concerned. Read this. It is conjecture. It's subjective. Now, there are points that aren't illogical. For instance, saying the way that the numbers have, I mean, this graph is completely manipulative, by the way. It's not completely exact the way they're showing you. But the point is that the numbers have pretty consistently gone up. And they act like there's no way that's real. Well, yeah, it is, because they've increasingly been killing children. It's pretty obvious. My point is, if you read it, it's all this doesn't appear that way, and these numbers wouldn't suggest that. And the point is, the IDF literally said that they trust them. So this is a meaningless point to contradict what the IDF told us. You could argue they're lying, but this article does not cite somebody contradicting that. They cite their own opinion based on what they're seeing, and the people that are saying deny it are the ones telling you that it's real. It's confounding. But let's just say you don't believe that, right? I believe people are dying. Well, they're going to come in with arguments like this. Well, maybe they are, but it wasn't before October 7th. Before October 7th, it was peace, and it's all their fault. The whole lie of the ceasefire only that was broken on October 7th. It's so infuriating. Here is Arsen Atrovsky, very, very Israeli name, it sounds like. And not a single child would have been killed if Hamas did not initiate massacre of October 7th, he says. UN News saying number of children killed in Gaza higher than from 4 years of world conflict, which is true. 4 years of combined world conflict. More children have been killed in just 4 months in Israel, or in occupied Gaza, Palestine. Think about how crazy that is. How anybody could pretend there's something that makes that make sense. Excuse me. And he says, well, not a one of all those murdered children would have been happened if it wasn't for October 7th. Like, even that? It's like, I don't think you think these things through. You're literally going, it's okay we killed 15,000 children because that happened on that one day. Even, it doesn't matter if they killed 50,000 people and it was all Jews and it was only about Jewish people, it still would not rationalize killing 15,000 innocent children. It's just crazy that they think that makes sense. But then we realize that's not what happened on October 7th, and there's parts we might get to today about more lies. But I simply said, you mean aside from all the Gaza and West Bank children murdered and illegally detained before October 7th? Sure. This is that same article, and there's plenty of them. This article is actually posted on October 6th. 2023 is the deadliest year for Palestinian children, say human rights groups. Deadliest year. But according to everybody, you get the point. It couldn't be the deadliest year for Palestinian children if it was a ceasefire before October 7th. And of course, things like this. Oh, post unavailable. I wonder why. Ask Twitter why that is. Now you'll notice if you click this and then go back, it's there. What do you know? How funny is that? But if you reload the page, oh my gosh, it's unavailable. Now, if you didn't have this link there, you wouldn't know it was not deleted, would you? It's really obvious, guys. I want you to know this is constant on Twitter right now, more than I've ever seen. Now, sure, I'm still being able to talk. No one's censoring me. They're suppressing for sure. I think all the people talking about this stuff, that's very obvious. With how much reach we're getting on a lot of these other platforms, there's no reason we're barely moving on Twitter. But the ultimate point is suppression of things that are important in the moment. Now, what it actually shows, and again, my point was if I hadn't put the link, which by the way, not that a lot of times doesn't even show up, or what I'll do is I share an article, I'll put the link to, so it doesn't, it's not just that window that pops up. In any case, if the link's not there, you don't know. You'd think it was gone. But here's what it says. You might not have seen this. Here is one of their chief Hasbara propagandists, Hanania Naftali, making fun of the two boys that were killed. And the IDF has now publicly apologized for, quote, mistaking the kid's bike for an RPG. You remember it because we talked about it the day it happened. And the day after when Euromed Human Rights Monitor did an investigation and proved that they lied about it. Just as always, guys, you're ahead of the story because you're following this platform. Here's what he said at the time. This was March 4th. Pretending, and here's the craziest part about it. When you listen to it and you watch them, they're not pretending we think. They're saying we confirmed this. We know. And even worse, what I showed you that time, they deliberately drew this to make it look like an RPG on the actual red line, even though when you look even closer, it's not like that. And it's a bike. And it's now been proven to be a bike. You want my opinion? They knew it was a bike. They knew that was a child. They knew it was one of the children that got lucky enough to get a bag of flour from the flour massacre, and so they murdered them. That's my opinion. They did murder them, though. The logic and the reasoning behind it, you can decide. But the point is, this guy laughed about it. Israel Defense Forces sends 2 Hamas terrorists children armed with RPG to their 72 virgins. You know, assuming what their religion is and everything else, because these people are totally not racist and bigoted, right? Either way, it was a bike. And of course, Twitter doesn't want you to see that because they're totally not fighting for one side of this argument. Here's the New York Times. The Israeli military acknowledges mistaking, in gigantic, not believable quotes, a bike for a weapon in a strike, but stands by the attack. Did you hear that last part? They acknowledge mistaking the bike, a child's bike, for a weapon, but stand by murdering the two children anyway. That's what they're talking about. I just don't even know how to make sense of that. How is anybody on this side? I'm just flabbergasted. Now here, there's somebody calling him out. And this was just posted on another platform. Israeli army acknowledges mistaking bike for rocket-propelled grenade in deadly Gaza strike. Now, this says two men, but as far as I can tell, based on the images and the other investigation, they look like children. And my opinion is based on the multiple factors that those two were both children. But I can't tell that they're men versus children, but that's what I think my research has shown. You guys can decide for yourself. And it's not like we have to dispute about whether they're murdering children. 15,000, it's probably, the point is the same either way. But this guy calls him out and says, any comment about your tweet glorifying the murder of two civilians on a bike as you mock them in the tweet? Why doesn't anyone report this in the West? Obviously, you know why. I mean, how about the other points? Where is the community notes? Where's the Twitter calling it out? People have tagged it. Look in the comments. People are tagging community notes. Nobody cares. Funny how that's happening, isn't it? And I simply said, you're a monster. Just unparalleled villainy. You're lying, and like the others, it's easily proven. Thank you to Rami Abdul from the Euromed Human Rights Monitor who broke this down in an investigation. Murdered him. Knowing that was not a rocket launcher, or at the very least, not knowing for sure. That's a war crime either way. And again, I just think it's deliberate with the way they drew that. They made sure it looked that way. Now, another way to manipulate you, and there's a lot of this stuff going on, is to try to roll this into some kind of inversion like we've seen everywhere else. Right? It's not like we can literally watch you murdering children or civilians if you don't think that's the case. That's what I think. Watch it. Endless streams of nonstop murder with rational things, right? Oh, look, I'm glad this guy did this. Don't forget, by the way, we broke this down and proved that symbol had nothing to do with what they claim it does. It's artists for ceasefire that they created themselves, as far as I can prove. And they're just making it into some random thing that they associate it with from some tweet that Elon Levy just randomly saw and made that the thing. Like everything else they're doing. But this woman says, have you noticed how Hamas supporters will simultaneously claim that the 10/7 attack or on civilians was justified due to actions of Israel's government, but war on Gaza is collective punishment because people of Gaza are not responsible for their acts of their government? I mean, this is a false reality. And this is projection as far as I can tell. That's what I would think. Now, as always, you're going to find people in any side that are going to have extreme views. That's just a static reality. That doesn't mean everybody. Now, realize, first of all, the idea of Hamas supporters. I don't know too many Hamas supporters. I know people who, like me, would argue that there's plenty of reason for Palestinians, especially, to support anybody fighting for the resistance, or there are some people that do openly just argue that almost as a sticky point to push back, or finally, there's some that maybe they do. But by and large, anybody honest can see that the vast majority are people that support Palestine. And people like this are so subjectively flimsy with their work that they just conflate those things. Free Palestine becomes you hate Jews, right? Zionism becomes anti-Semitic. It's just so convoluted and not what the reality is. At best, you could say it's subjective because you don't know what they mean. When somebody says Zionism, hey, maybe they just mean Zionism. Shocking, I know. But the point is Hamas supporters. So that's clearly Palestine supporters. Because the idea is there's not some massive group of Hamas supporters flooding around the world. It's Palestinians. And what she's trying to pretend is that somehow, which I've not seen, that you're seeing Palestinian supporters simultaneously claim that attacks on civilians were justified. Who's saying that? I know there are some people in the conversation that are making an argument, and like even someone like myself that would objectively try to argue why somebody might make that claim. You know, here's Hamas saying that they're settlers or they're occupying, therefore that's why. No one's saying that about babies, literally anywhere. But there are some that might try to argue that. Me, from the very beginning, hard line, nobody should argue that civilians are our target. You remember I've said that countless times. But I can, of course, stand back and argue why somebody might make that claim. But my point is the same, and you all know it. Literally. And I've talked to them. That's my point. I've talked to many of these groups. Of course, you could argue they're lying, but that's the same point, isn't it? Not outwardly, publicly, is anybody saying that the civilians that were killed on October 7th were justified. And I mean, I'm talking about like in the push of the protests and the momentum and the activist groups. There are probably individuals that would say that. But you have to realize that she's trying to make this into a massive group thing, that all these people mean that. Now, what you will find is the exact opposite. And again, that's not just me saying the opposite. We can prove it. I can make an entire show of them justifying the murder of children. You can literally show Israeli politicians saying that children are not innocent. Think how crazy that is. But yet them conflating the idea that you wink, wink, have this scarf on, therefore you want to kill all the Jewish babies. It's crazy. But she's saying the idea is that you're justifying that, but then saying that it's collective punishment on them, even though they voted for their government. They're not even the same thing. The argument of collectively punishing all the civilians in Gaza because Hamas did something, invaded, is crazy. It's just, I just have these moments where I'm just like, it just can't, like, I don't want to ever use the whole, they're a bot, because I don't know that. But I just have this hard time thinking any logical person, again, maybe they're just a blind Zionist shill. I don't know, but I think this is crazy. Then she says in the same kind of game, also, that the children of Gaza don't deserve this because they weren't old enough to vote in 2006, or how about at all ever because they're children, you absolute monster. But then goes, but the children of Israel deserve it. Nobody's making that claim. Nobody's saying children are occupiers. That is an agenda that's being pushed out by Zionists, which I just broke down. Charles says Israel has been mistreating Palestinians for 75 years. No wonder they rebel from time to time. Palestinians deserve their own land, their own citizenship without interference from Israel. And it says, you take my water, burn my olive trees, destroy my house, take my job, steal my land, imprison my father, kill my mother, bomb my country, starve us all, humiliate us all, but I am to blame for my resistance. Good way to put that. But again, we just talked about this. I said there's a huge new push coming from the Zionist side, atrocity propaganda in sticker form, a sticker false flag, call it what you will. This, like all hilariously bad Zionist propaganda, is embarrassing. Literally no one is genuinely advocating for Palestinians, for Palestine. None of them advocating for Palestine are saying this. Rape is resistance? Seriously? Babies are occupiers too? I mean, it's just so clumsy. It's not true. It's simply not the reality. Because think about how the argument is that they secretly want rape to be part, they like that they were hurt. But the idea, you're going to pretend that while they're publicly saying that we don't agree with that, or publicly saying that it didn't even happen, that you're attacking them for not believing you're ignoring the claims of rape, but then arguing they're going to go put stickers up that say rape is resistance. Like, that's like they don't think these things through. You could have made it say all Israelis are occupiers. That would, at the very least, you could make you argue that they think any civilians are targets. That at least would have been like logical. This just goes so far over the top. I just think they aren't that smart. Whoever made this did not think, they are thinking at the level that their mind is at. Well, it's a sticker and it's got a Palestinian flag, so there must have been a Palestinian supporter. It's like, that's really stupid. It could be, sure. But it completely contradicts everything they're saying. Even if you think they mean something else, why would they post the sticker that admits the other thing? It's just painful. The point is, this is clearly not what they're saying it is. And I've gone over this in depth, watched the last show. Now here is a video of them on a TV show. This was posted today. I don't know if the TV show is today, where they're literally saying it's good that they're burning the villages, and the entire audience claps. So this is the point, though. There's two things to pick up on this. One, the TV station pushes back, saying, why say that you're doing this and hurt us in the international community? So it basically means, no, don't not do it. Don't stop hurting Palestinians. Just stop telling the world you're doing that. That's from the TV host guy. But then after that, the point is, what was it again? Let's just watch it. Ultimately, the guy says we're burning their villages, and they all clap about it. But it shows you that they just don't want you to see it. So it's like this conscious awareness of genocidal actions at some level. It's not all Israelis, not all Jewish people, but it's a huge portion of the Israeli population, clearly, because they've been manipulated by a Zionist agenda, that think that's acceptable, but don't want you to recognize that's who they are. Because we know that there's a legal process that's being conducted at the Hague, and songs of our soldiers like May Burn the Village, right? So soldiers singing and dancing about burning down Palestinian homes. It doesn't exactly help us in the international effort. Right. Don't care that they're praising the murder of children. Care that it's hurting the way people view us. And then people try to cut in. He goes, the question is, why insist on this? He says, the fact that we're Jews doesn't help us in the international effort. Of course. Jump in with the victimhood nonsense and argue that somehow Jewish people are oppressed in the international community. Literally the extreme in-your-face opposite. But regardless, the point is that Zionist occupation is what makes the Jewish community more at risk. But this person has completely embodied and identified with the idea that everybody in the world is out to get you because you're a Jewish person. Again, it's just legitimately, provably not the case. That's not to say there's not racism. He says, wait a second. I just want to tell you, why don't you sing other songs that don't create a problem for us, right? So just hide the genocidal actions. Keep it under wraps while Americans are looking. Here's the best part. He goes, no, wait. I thought I have something to say. He says, I don't know if you're following the news, saying because we're all seeing it. He says, we are burning their village. We'll laugh. And he goes, and it's good that we're burning their village. Look at that woman behind him. Watch the woman right behind him. Just her reaction after saying, we're burning their villages, and that's a good thing. Look at how happy she is. Huge smile, big cry, yay, murder Palestinians. You tell me why that's okay. It says, and this is the part I wanted to highlight too. The host, clearly with a mandate, we act according to international law. Make sure you hear that as we're clapping for murder. That's pretty desperate. And he's smiling. Like he knows that's a bad thing. For whoever's over his head driving Zionist talking points, in my opinion, is driving him to make sure that kind of thing does not become prominent. Too late. And you can see it on his face. See the way he's reacting. Something to say about what you asked. I don't know if anybody's seen the film that they showed in the Knesset. The 46. Right. I saw a quick little image of a crib that was bloody, and that was enough. I believe everything they said. Right? That's the way that's meant to work. The point was about how they are celebrating the suffering of people. And because Netanyahu showed you a propaganda film, you're now screaming and praising the murder of children. But we're the anti-Semites, right? Palestinians are Semites. Let's get that wrapped and get that understood. But here's what David Marcus said. And this is the same point. I just watched the IDF's latest video of footage from October 7th. What? What is this, some kind of new installation in a series? The latest episode of the October 7th propaganda? Why in the world, 5 months later, are they still dripping out different manufactured, edited, highly produced videos from October 7th? How do we not see? Like, here, that's the point. Literally everybody sees that that's clumsy and transparent propaganda, seemingly other than Israel. I don't know if they're just so trapped in their own bubble. They don't realize how clearly we all see through this. And then they just dump out a new propaganda video with the same recycled claims in another light with other claims. It's just bad. I just watched the new episode of October 7, and he goes, if that happened in the U.S., our response would be 1 million people dead. Yeah, that's my point too. If that happened, the U.S. wouldn't even blink, and they would murder a whole bunch of civilians in another country because that's what they do. Same thing's happening now. Why do you think it's any different? You're murdering the equivalent percentage of what's going on in Gaza to what would happen in this country. Somebody did the math. It ended up being like 12 million people in the United States if this happened in this country. That's the percentage of people dying in Gaza. Israel's restraint, he says, is almost unfathomable. They're not murdering enough, this guy says, because he saw the latest episode of October 7. I just think this is so crazy. And people are quite literally seeing through this in such a way. I mean, the media, even in our Congress right now, saying Netanyahu has to step. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get to it. We'll see if we got time. But they're literally calling for another election in Israel. Like, these people, and this is why I laugh about people like Schumer and Pelosi. Like, I think they're getting so decrepit and old and out of touch that they don't realize how dumb that is. That you think you can stand up and be like, this supposedly sovereign country should have an election because we don't like what's happening. It's like, did you have a senior moment there, bud? Like, you just literally said they should have an election because we're unhappy with what's going on. Now, let's understand it. Genocide, if that's what the game he's playing, would be something that action should be taken for, but not demanding some election at a spur of the moment thing. Think about how crazy that is. How about just forcing them to bring aid in for starving people? No, we can't do that. We're going to force politics and let that take 5 months and let them keep dying while it happens, acting like we care. Let's build a port that's only going to allow something that drives people into an area that Gazans can, the island that they built. Remember that conversation? That's what that ultimately comes back to. They've already floated that island, the island for Palestinians to live on. Oh, whoops. That's the same plan for the port, the pier that they're talking about. It's just so insulting how obvious all this is. I just talked about this, by the way, dismantling all the Zionist propaganda. Now, we just talked about oh, by the way, that was the other real point to kind of come from there, realizing that, if they can't just dehumanize these people completely, like just get you to the point where you're buying all the narratives, or, that maybe they're not all have a right to come back, or maybe all the narratives of occupation, but that they're all terrorists, or no, they're all just October 7th for it all being killed. No, just because they're all being human shields, or whatever the escalation of the narrative is, you could bring it all the way to the point to where they've lost control of every other narrative, except they finally just go, okay, fine, but it's Hamas doing all the killing, right? Everything else falls flat. I think it's everything, including this, but you can see kind of like this evolution of the narrative where, oh, that's not working. Okay, how about this? Oh, you don't believe Hamas is doing it? Well, then now it's UNRWA's fault. Oh, you don't believe they're doing it? Well, go back to Hamas shooting people. It's just like this reflexive propaganda. It's so embarrassing. Robert just wrote this. Israel's manufacturing false stories of Hamas killing Gazans. It's a scathing breakdown. It's very easy to see, including source material directly from the corporate media, as well as directly from the Israeli government itself, proving to you that they are killing, they're literally shooting civilians while they're getting aid repeatedly into this very day, right now, multiple times, again, at the very same locations. His point is they're manufacturing false stories to make sure this happens. This was one of them. The Flower Massacre was completely engineered. I broke it down. And by the way, I thought his article was so good today. I'm not going to do this normally, but I just shared it today on Substack to make sure it got more reach. It's an important article. By the way, make sure you support us on Substack as well. Lots more coming out there. And by the way, if you haven't seen it, make sure you support our Save the Last American Vagabond campaign. I wrote about what's going on if you want to check out more. But let's get into something he wrote in this article. The focal point of why this actually happened. And I reached out to him about specifically discussing Mohammed al-Arajah, somebody who was killed trying to get aid. Now, the story was that it was Hamas. Turns out, it was most likely Israel. And this goes back to the origins of this conversation. Now, maybe not. I think there's other points before, but this was one of the bigger events that became like the forceful point that then carried the conversation that Hamas is shooting at people. Hamas is stealing the aid. None of which has been evidence backed up at all, as we've shown you many times. Even the U.S. is saying they have yet to this very day presented evidence that Hamas is diverting aid or shooting at people getting aid. And let's not forget, the point is that this massacre that they obfuscated intentionally, even blacking out areas, they were surrounding this. There was IDF tanks around this. There was IDF snipers. There was no Hamas present. They lied about that, shot at them while they were doing it, lied about that, got caught for it, and then manufactured an idea that they rushed them or something. It was so pathetically obvious. But they are shooting people for getting aid. This was reported in February 16th. And it says, riots at the Rafah crossing. Remember, right before this, they were telling you that they were bombing the Rafah crossing, that they were shooting people for trying to go across. That was the reality. And then all of a sudden, Hamas is doing it. A Palestinian boy tried to take humanitarian aid from trucks along with many others, was shot dead, apparently, it says, from Hamas police officers, which very well could also just be, even if it's true, just police officers and not Hamas. But it says many of the young men's family arrived at the crossing and crowd clashed ensued. The entrance at gate crossed walls was set on fire and the Hamas police intervened. Now, that does not appear to be what happened. This video doesn't show anything. It shows people running around. There's no evidence of any kind of what actually happened. And that's where it got left. And yet this is now where Elon Levy and the rest of them, they point back and say Hamas was shooting people. But if you break the story down, it's not the reality. Now, to not get into it too in depth, the point is you can read this article. I hope you will. The reality is simply that this is a person who already wrote before this. It's a Ynet reporter who made this claim. And in just, I think earlier in the month, wrote about another child allegedly being shot in the exact same way in the same situation that was later shown to be false. This is the kind of thing we're dealing with, right? So it's very clear that at the very least, this is completely unverified and nothing but this video made sense of that. Now let's go into we don't need to even the flower massacre itself, which I thought was right there. I guess I didn't include it. Hold on. I was going to say, we don't need to go any further than this to be able to prove that they did for sure shoot people starving. The flower massacre. The point is, even going forward into today and a couple last days, you could see more of it. And before we get into that, this was the 972 magazine writer saying Israeli police shot and killed. Oh, wait, no, this is the wrong one. Oh, shoot. Oh, no, this is the right one. I'm sorry. I forgot why I included this. She had a comment about the Hamas overlap. I'm not sure if I included that. This was a point about just whether they would just shoot a child. Israeli police shot and killed a child at this Shufat camp in East Jerusalem. This was last night, being the 12th, when he simply shot fireworks in the air. The claim, as usual, is that they felt threatened. Ben-Gvir publicly spoke up and said that they killed the terrorist for shooting fireworks. He said that. Literally admitted it was fireworks. She's claiming they shot it up in the air. They said they were threatened. They shot the child. It was a child. This is not the same as the stabbing discussion that point about the 15-year-old, that nobody wants to consider whether there was even what actually happened or whether this kid his family was murdered in front of them or the fact that he's lived in 75 years of brutal occupation. He's just a terrorist right out of the gate, no matter what. Either way, the point here is this kid shot fireworks and got murdered. So let that flavor these other conversations too. And I simply said, if you're asking whether they would shoot a child for no reason, Israel, and blame it on Hamas, which is what they do. Here's an example. I said, what I failed to mention last night when I covered this, obviously it was a celebration for Ramadan. Guys, the kid was literally shooting fireworks in the air to celebrate, if you're American, something like a Christmas kind of concept. Not that it's the same thing, but just picture that for you. And you're shooting fireworks in the air, celebrating your religious holiday, and a cop shoots you in the face and says you're a terrorist. That's what's happening. I said, this is the genocidal mindset of the Zionist occupation. Make them suffer for existing. It's just so damn sad. Now, here's a great breakdown from Forensic Architecture, which makes it very clear what's going on. Very prominent group, by the way, that's got very good standing. It's got a pretty good following, almost 100,000 followers. But the point is, Forensic Architecture apparently has some pretty good standing when it comes to media conversations and different things just like this, cited by high-level entities. The point is, always, no matter how much clout they have or what they've done in the past, just engage with the information, whether it's factual, whether you can prove it, whether you can back it up for yourself. But it says, since October 7th, the Israeli army has weaponized humanitarian measures such as evacuation orders, safe routes, safe zones to support their military operations. Oh my God, surprise, surprise. Facilitate the mass displacement of Palestinians, meaning, just like we keep proving to you, just like literally everybody anywhere, including the New York Times, including Haaretz, have told you, Israel used the most destructive bombs on the areas they were told were safe. That's the point, because they don't care. They're murdering people just to murder people. Did I cover something up? Oh, that's right. I doubled it up. So the point is that we know that. Everyone's known that. We've all broke it down that they have bombed places they were told were safe. And for some reason, people in power in Congress, and they don't care. They let it keep going. It says, our analysis reveals how Israel's systematic displacement of Palestinians towards areas already rendered unlivable by attacks on critical civilian infrastructure has occurred in 3 phases. Literally making sure the areas they're about to go to are unlivable and then driving them there. This has been a torturous process, and people are allowing it to happen. And I don't mean torturous by byproduct. This has been manufactured to torture and suffer and humiliate these people. Phase 1, October 13th, when the Israeli army ordered 1.1 million Palestinians in the area of north of Gaza to evacuate within 24 hours, and then murdered a hell of a lot of them when they didn't. A new border checkpoint was to enforce no north-south divide, which, by the way, we just showed you was part of their plan. They're going to try to further occupy and control all of North and pretend like they're giving them a state solution by simply allowing them to keep living like the Gaza situation in just the South. So we're going to take half of what you already had after all of this and pretend that's giving you something. Typical. It says phase 2, December 1st, Israel published an online interactive evacuation grid, which announced evacuation orders by dividing Gaza into 623 blocks. Its use has been unclear, inconsistent, and contradictory. And amid communication blackouts, most Gazans can't even access it. The point was, blocks they were told were safe weren't. They were bombing and shooting, and it was a lie. It was completely manufactured, and I've seen at least 5 different coverages of this showing you of provable evidence that what they said was a certain area turned out not to be. And it was all convoluted. Now, that either shows you that they're completely out of they don't have any control over their own army. They have no idea what's going on, or they just lied to them so they would go wherever they would go and they would get shot anyway, and they blame it on them. Now I'm going to go over here just for the interest of time. There's a cool graphic breakdown they had here. I want to just show you some of this too. Israel's military campaign in Gaza after October 7th, 2023 is turning principles of humanitarianism into weapons deployed against a civilian population. That's very, very clear. It says forensic architecture has documented 3 phases of mass displacement across Gaza. All crimes, guys, presented as humanitarian evacuation orders directed civilians towards supposed safe zones. That they know. They knew this was happening. Phase 1, dividing the entire area. On the same day as the evacuation order was given for them to flee into southern Gaza, the quote, safe route, which we proved at the time as well, along Salah al-Din Street was bombed by Israel. It's just as simple as that. It's very public. There was no accident that happened there. They said, go along this road specifically. There was other ways they could have gone, and then they bombed that road. Why? Because they were told to walk there. They were telling them there, they bombed them there. They said, go to this area, and they bombed that area. It's happened every single time. Every single location. Khan Yunis, Rafah, they're bombing Rafah right now. There's a car, they just bombed a car today. A civilian convoy was indeed hit, and 70 civilians were reportedly killed. Now, it's clear they weren't just bombing every single one of them, but this was probably just a torture point. Just killed 70 of them, let them all suffer, let them keep going. I mean, if you can't see that's happening by now, then you don't want to. It says the area of South Wadi. That was the other part we just read. October 15th. Hundreds of thousands of them. UN report revealed widespread destruction throughout Gaza, including in the southern areas where they were told to go. This is the kind of stuff that, by the way, on their tweet, they just tagged the ICJ. This kind of stuff is going to be used if there's any honesty in this process. And it says to enforce the administrative new south-north divide, they carved an east to west military route through the lived fabric of Gaza. Right, meaning they destroyed homes that didn't need to be destroyed under the justification that they needed to divide it even more. Satellite imagery reveals that by 14 of November, the Israeli checkpoint had been installed where the new border intersection on the street would be. A video recorded from the Israeli military position shows a closer view of the checkpoint, saying witnesses describe how people passing through the point. Hold on. I don't want it to play. They describe how people passing through this checkpoint were ordered to show their IDs and undergo what appears to be a facial recognition scan. Yep. Those orders were communicated by megaphones under threat of sniper fire. How much you want to bet this is where they're being told to renounce their refugee status? We just showed you that. They're being facial scanned. They're being videotaped. They're telling you renounce your this is what we're being told. We're being lied to about the whole damn thing. They are actively trying to erase the reality of the right to return. Videos captured south of the checkpoint show how this makeshift border is enforced by the Israeli military. Palestinians who followed the instructions to move south were not allowed to return to the north, even though just recently Netanyahu told them to. The video shows snipers positioned south of the checkpoint, not just because they're Hamas, just because anybody would be shot, and they lied about that. Reportedly to shoot at anyone who disobeyed the order. Phase 2 is the evacuation grid. Interactive grid, which basically turned out to be nothing but a big lie, including Khan Yunis, refugee camps. Now, Dr. Mohammed Harara described how the Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis received orders from the Israeli military to evacuate along with nearby residential areas and a school where people had taken refuge, despite the fact that it is in... Oh, wait, hold on. I'll make sure there's at the wrong order, the other part. Yeah, well, it says evacuation orders were unevenly distributed by airdrop leaflets or published online during infrequent internet and telecommunication blackouts. Yeah, the point, just to kind of get quickly, is, it was confused. Nobody knew what was going on. They're told to evacuate ways that they ended up getting shot at. Oh, and even the ways that they proved were supposed to be the right ways, we showed they bombed them anyway. Contradictory instructions, such as those left Palestinians uncertain about which way to go. And this isn't about torture, guys. I completely believe that. Also, seemingly no way for civilians to confirm the information. Blaming them for the whole thing. I just think it's important how clearly this is broken down. Very clear evidence showing you, forensic evidence showing you that they're choosing to hurt people that are told to go in safe areas and then being bombed. Yeah, it says Palestinian civilians, at this case in February 20, were often directed towards areas that were already or eminently under attack. How do you make sense of that? It's like today where they're airdropping aid and Israel's targeting their bombing to where the aid's falling. They've seen 2 examples of that. That is vindictive, malicious, it's psychotic. Now here's, within hours, Al-Mawasi was attacked, including a building operated by Doctors Without Borders. They've never to this day claimed that Doctors Without Borders is Hamas. They just don't care. No one in the corporate media said a word. The U.S. government never picked it up. Only people like us were screaming about it. Doctors Without Borders were screaming about it. Nothing. No war crime. No accusation of war crimes. All this is provable. Do I even need to go any further? I mean, it's just so blatantly obvious. And the point is, as of this was posted to the 12th, it's more today, by the way, the war on Gaza, Israel has killed over 400 people that we can prove who've just been simply waiting for aid. No argument that they're Hamas, just simply popping off people that are trying to eat as you're starving them to death. This is from today. This is the 4th one that I can prove. 4th. Death trap. Israeli forces kill 6 in new attack on Gaza aid seekers. The deadly incident comes after Israeli airstrike on an UNRWA-run center. That's the building you're looking at, guys. Somebody got murdered inside the UNRWA center with food for people that... That's unbelievable. Shot dead. Israeli forces shot dead at least 6 Palestinians and wounded 83 others as they were simply waiting for food at the Kuwaiti roundabout. The same damn location. Guys, this is a death trap. They are literally continually sending aid, Israel, not UNRWA, to these areas and then shooting at them when they go, specifically the Kuwaiti roundabout. This is the 3rd time I've seen the Kuwait roundabout, personally. The attack on Thursday, today, the roundabout, took place just hours after 5 people were killed by an airstrike on the food distribution center in Rafah. So we're supposed to wait for a plan, but yet they're bombing Rafah. In the meantime, they're bombing the location they're told to go to be safe before they tell them to go elsewhere. Before the invasion, they're bombing them. There's no explanation for that. You're bombing the location that you've been told is the red line for everybody, even though they don't care about that, while you're claiming you're going to make a plan for them to move to because we want the good people out of the way, and then you just bomb anyway. Nobody says anything about it, not in the corporate media. And here's UNRWA pointing it out. At least 1 UNRWA staff member has been killed, 22 injured when they bombed a distribution center. But UNRWA's Hamas, so who cares, right? It's just so despicable. Once again, bombing protected locations in Rafah, which is supposed to be safe. Philippe Lazzarini points out the same thing, bombing these locations as supplies are running out, creating famine. Every day they share the coordinates of their facilities, which probably shouldn't now because they're bombing them because they're UNRWA. They just don't care. The UN, its personnel, premises, and assets must be protected. The thing is crazy. That hasn't changed. The UN doesn't maintain anything else. Even the United States says something, but Israel just pretends that they can say UNRWA is Hamas. So they just bomb Hamas locations. Or excuse me, they just bomb UNRWA locations. It's just simple as that. They just bomb them because they said it elsewhere, because Eli David said it once online, and they just murder all these people. And again, don't forget that they have yet to even prove these allegations. Doesn't matter, though. Biden won't care because he's going to keep funding them anyway, as he just told us. The last time an UNRWA convoy tried to move into the northern Gaza area, it was hit by Israeli gunfire. This is posted March 13th. So now we've got a convoy openly shot by the IDF that was an UNRWA convoy, probably because they don't want UNRWA to, they want UNRWA to be out of the scene so they can constantly blame them for not being there. Perfect the way that works. And they bombed a distribution center, and they bombed the Kuwaiti roundabout. That's over the last 24 hours. And here's Euronews condemning Israel for shooting aid deliveries. CNN telling you that they are, by satellite, proving that they shot food deliveries. And I keep showing you this stuff. Just Human Rights Watch. October 23rd, they're blocking the aid still. October 30th, Gaza blocking the aid. All Human Rights Watch. December 18th, using starvation as a weapon because they're blocking the aid, denying the access to aid. February 6th, defying the court, starving Gaza. Why? Because they're illegally blocking the aid. Over and over and over, we can prove this, right? J Street literally telling you, admitting that Netanyahu is destroying the government because he is deliberately restricting aid to Gaza. The J Street says this, and J Street is a prominent organization. J Street is the political home for pro-Israel, pro-peace, pro-democracy Americans. That's what it says. And they're telling you that Israel's blocking aid. Isn't it crazy how Elon Levy continues to scream that's not happening? I'm going to skip this just because it's Matt Miller doing his wishy-washy BS like always. The point is that even the people in the State Department briefings are going, come on, man, you have leverage. You could do that. You could stop Israel from doing this, and you're not. And his answer is basically admitting that's the case because he just can't say no or yes. But here's the point. This is from yesterday. Yesterday while they were shooting convoys. Yesterday while they bombed civilians. And by the way, as J Street's saying, you're blocking the food aid. Here's what he says. Israel wants aid to reach civilians who need it while making sure Hamas couldn't steal it. Again, you mean the Hamas diverting aid or stealing aid that you have yet to prove, that even the U.S. publicly said you have yet to prove, which means there's no evidence for it. Yeah. And here's Kogat, by the way, the same group that's just an Israeli platform that is not part of helping anybody. It says, in accordance with the government directives, these aid trucks have gone through. It was done of basically saying they're part of it. I mean, it's just their World Food Program is doing this without them. They're the ones blocking all of this. And they just point at what gets through despite their best efforts and going, we are a part of that. Look at them dropping aid because we won't let aid through. And they go, we were a part of that. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. And I simply said, you're lying. Israel's manufacturing false stories of Hamas killing Gazans. We can prove this over and over and over. And people like Elon Levy have the desperately unhappy job of just keeping the lie going. As literally everybody, including every one of your allies, including Jewish organizations, are going, you're a liar and you're murdering children. And he goes, they've got more food than ever. That's got to be pretty shitty. Excuse, shouldn't have cussed. Terrible job. Here's what I posted about this if you want to check it out. Just again, this is another one they just put on 11th, showing you, here's the scene of a bustling market at the what? They're lying about this, guys. They're lying about all this stuff. I said the Zionist-controlled fake humanitarian group has been repeatedly lying about the overabundance of food in a provably destroyed area in Gaza. The Nusrat Bakery and surrounding refugee camp, it's all been destroyed, and yet they're pretending it's a bustling area. This is the actual bakery they keep pretending is pushing out more bread than they've ever seen. Airstrikes on Gaza bakeries add to catastrophic food shortages. That was October. It was 4 months ago, October something. And that point, here's their post from that same point. This is Kogat lying. February 23rd. You mean February 23rd? You mean, the point is they're saying this is at the Nusrat Bakery. Look at all that bread. Except it's pretty clear that was destroyed on October 23rd. Even Twitter called it out. So there's Kogat, a group pretending to fight for humanitarian aid, lying about giving that aid, and even Twitter calls it out. And yet they just keep professing about how they're fighting for Palestinians. Like that's worse than a terrorist organization, guys. You are actually starving children by acting like pretendingly you're helping them. And at least terrorist organizations just murder people. You murder people and ask for praise. Think about how crazy that is. But they keep doing it. Same thing. Here's Thomas simply pointing out on October 18th that bakery was completely destroyed. They just keep lying about it. Kogat, it's like I said, doing the same thing. Elon Levy doing the same damn thing. This is the one that has the provable, like they put this over saying February 8th, except sorry, fake video. It was destroyed a long time ago. On the aid side of it, again, David Roth Lindbergh pointing out they're bombing where the aid is dropping. Now, there's another example of that. Solomon Ahmad pointing out that Egypt and Belgium airdropping aid and Israel bombs the exact same location the aid falls in. It just does, guys, it's constant. And I just told you the other day, that's assuming that the aid doesn't just crush your children, because that happened. And sure, it's probably a one-off or whatever else, but the parachute didn't open and Palestinian children got crushed. You know, it's like, how do we know it's not deliberate, quite frankly? Now, let me play this, and I think we're going to finish with this segment and one last thing on it, but I'm going to play this video again because I think it's important. It's powerful. Oops, not that one. This one.
I saw the US airdrop food. My first response was really anger. It was horror that this is apparently the best the US can do. Who is the superpower here? Is it the US or Israel? There is no place that's safe. There's no place where you can find reliable food, where people can get shelter. Gazans are exhausted, angry, and scared, and do not buy this argument that the US is suddenly caring about them by airdropping a handful of food.
People have compared these scenes to the Hunger Games, and for good reason. Airdrops is something you use in otherwise inaccessible geographic locations, a mountaintop, the middle of the jungle. What the US has done is provide less meals than would have fit into a single truck. And the reason that these trucks aren't getting into the Gaza Strip is because there's a policy decision by Israel, fully endorsed, supported by the United States, to starve these people into submission.
So the Biden administration is essentially doing the least effective and most expensive method of getting aid to people that need it, because Israel simply won't concede to any American pressure on this one relatively simple point. There is something dystopian about these airdrops and about the way that they pit people against each other.
And that's the worst part about it, is that people are starving to death and then you blame them for desperately trying to feed themselves and their children. But this is the most insulting part about this. State Department tweets this out. Even as we work to surge humanitarian assistance. You mean barely meet the pre-October 7th amount? Hardly a surge. Not what's happening. But as we work to surge humanitarian assistance by every means necessary, or not, or just the least effective and most expensive, the most effective way to really get that done is with a ceasefire. Guys, that's actually what he said. And as Khalid points out, you'd never even know the U.S. has blocked every single ceasefire resolution to come before the Security Council in the last 5 months. Now, that's true because pause is not a ceasefire. They're just conflating those terms because they want you to think that. They have vetoed every legitimate ceasefire other than a momentary pause that only Israel wants. And they're claiming they want that or people back. They literally don't. It's pretty sad.
Even as we work to surge humanitarian assistance by every means necessary, the most effective way to really get that done is with a ceasefire and having an environment
right there. He must know that's
much more conducive to getting the aid through. There's a very strong proposal on the table right now. The question is, will Hamas take it?
See, that's his game. No, they've offered it. It's still there. This is my point about this. You can prove this because of other people involved. Egypt's talking points. You can prove it. So Blinken knows he's lying. And even worse, he knows that we can see that because, or rather anybody looking at the actual back and forth can know that. So here's what's crazy is he knows that his people around him know he's lying. He's aiming this at the people that he's trying to influence. The average Americans out there that are going to, they hope they'll sway into allowing a little bit more genocide. Or you can frame it however you want. But he knows he's lying. He knows that people will see that he's lying, and they don't care. The point is, it's very clear. Even Associated Press said in the beginning, in the first week forward, Hamas has had on the table a full exchange for all the hostages and a complete ceasefire from the first week, and has never taken it off the table. It's still there right now. Now, they bring up other things, and they've gone back and forth on different points, but they've made very clear the ones that are not going to be movable is a real ceasefire and a full hostage exchange, which includes aid coming in and so on. Now, you can argue that's them not moving on the points, but the reality is an agreement has to be beneficial. So if you're arguing the only things that matter for them need to be not involved, well, then what's the point of even having an agreement? Because the idea is a pause, as we all know it. Anybody that's not a genocidal Zionist is going to say, well, if you just pause, well, the bad thing that we're all trying to stop is going to start again. That's kind of a obvious reality. It's self-evident. So if the point is we're trying to stop the genocide, why is a pause make any sense? Because they're not trying to stop the genocide. They're just trying to get Israeli hostages back to appease the families who are trying to remove the Israeli government. And that's not even because they want their hostages back. It's clear they're trying to kill them. It's because they're just trying to balance a losing situation. They're all losing in every way right now. That's what it really is. Now, AIPAC speaks up and says, surely the ceasefire now squad will condemn this, right? Condemn what? Oh, well, this lie the Jerusalem Post put out that says, well, what's funny is, I love this because the Post changed, which is funny. So this is what it originally said. Gaza hostage deal. Hamas agrees to U.S. proposal for Gaza ceasefire, which is not what happened. The Post updated to saying, Gaza hostage deal. Hamas denies agreeing to U.S. proposal. How many times have I already had to cover this? How infuriating is this? If you guys are following this, you've seen me do this at least 4 times. I told you the same thing. Hamas has said, this is what we're offering. We won't agree to a pause. So don't speak between Biden and Netanyahu and pretend like you guys agree and then say, we're this close. We'll tell you tomorrow and then go, well, Hamas denied it. Well, you're manufacturing the illusion that Hamas was even involved in that conversation. If you were all in the same room, it would have not been on the table because only Israel wants that. Not even the families want that. Only Netanyahu and his government want that. So they're just going, we never agreed to that. So where'd the lie come from? Well, we can tell you from Blinken, Biden, and Netanyahu. They're lying about it to apply pressure and get their own people off their back. And I simply said, you guys collude to point at each other's outright lies as if that proves anything. Hamas has offered the full exchange since the first week. Netanyahu has objected that countless times. I include all the images to show you. And the point here is to show you that, like I said before, even Smotrich said, hostages coming home is not the most important thing. And yet you pretend like that's what you're fighting for? Surely an American organization isn't going out of its way to fight for Israel, right? It just seems funny. America brokered it, Israel accepted it, Hamas rejected it. Lie. You're lying to American people for an Israeli government agenda. But we all know that's how this platform works. I'll include all those links. Mariv says the Israeli narrative is that Hamas is not interested in a deal now, that it has stopped negotiations. This is incorrect. This is the writer for 972 magazine, Washington Post, and so on. Israel may find it unacceptable, but their position has remained consistent. See, anybody with a brain and being honest has been saying this from the beginning. Full stop to war, withdrawal of the IDF, return to displacement in northern Gaza. They don't want that, so Israel continues to refuse the deal. Now, the point of look at it like this. Again, it's the same point. Now, if Israel were to come back, for instance, and say, let's debate whether or not, to like the time, like a specific point within that agreement. Let's debate the amount of aid, right? Let's debate where it can go or what the end up area, like that is a debate. That's a negotiation. But for Israel to come out and say the exact opposite of the absolute, like they both have their red lines. Israel's not going to allow them to have all of Israel. Netanyahu won't allow that. So imagine if they came up and said, that's the only thing we want, or vice versa. No, neither of them are coming in with good faith. So from the first week, Hamas was clear about what they wanted, whatever you think about them, as absolutes, and have tried to negotiate the other parts of it, as Egypt has made very clear. The one that's not acting in good faith is the Israeli government, who has continually lied about the process, continually refused full exchanges, which is what they pretended they wanted in the first place, and offered something that only Netanyahu's government wants. And continued to go, bring them home, as the only thing stopping that is Netanyahu. And them, if you listen to the same people have been saying, not these little graphics, but these people when they were there speaking on the record saying, stop bombing us with IDF bombs. Still accept the deal. Take us home. The families want them to accept the deal. A full exchange, as even that author has written about. But she's just, not this one, but this propagandist just keeps doing this. Bring her home. Well, speak to Netanyahu. He's the only one stopping that. Then Elon Levy wrote this yesterday. And this is my point, going back to kind of like just the, like, imagine making up some kind of genocidal imaginary situation. He says leaked, and he thinks he's funny. The next plot of the Taken sequel, which is not called a sequel when it's part 4, you absolute moron. But he says Liam Neeson's daughter gets abducted by sex slavers, but this time he has to fight protesters demanding he reach an immediate ceasefire with her abductors, deny that she was abducted at all, and spread lies to pressure him to abandon her. So it's just like, that doesn't even connect. Who in any conversation is denying that people were abducted? Is that even happening? Anywhere, on any side of this conversation? Pretty sure everyone knows that there are people taken in Gaza. Pretty sure that Israel has incessantly made clear that people were taken and that people in Gaza are clearly continuing. Like, it's like completely out of whole cloth. It doesn't even connect. And then he says, spread lies to pressure him to abandon her. Like, what are you trying to manufacture here? Like, this is more than desperate. You're trying to create an entire fantasy to push people to convince, to like, that we're trying to drive you to let them stay there. I simply said, who's calling for you to abandon the hostages? Literally no one. You claim those calling for a ceasefire, which is what he's trying to pretend, want you to abandon the hostages. He's actually said that before. Except the only problem there is that the ceasefire you keep refusing will actually bring them all home, which you know that. He just doesn't care. So why lie about that? Well, we know why. Who's actually abandoning them if you keep refusing the ceasefire? Elon Levy is. Netanyahu is. That's what's going on. And again, Smotrich saying, bringing hostages home is not the most important thing. Right, these are the government entities. So let's keep pretending like this makes any sense at all. Now, we're at just about 3 hours here. My last 3 points to go into was going to be the port, what's going to happen in Rafah, and to finish on one last point. So I think what we're going to do really quickly, I'm going to get into the Rafah point because it hasn't seemed to have happened yet. But the reality is it's just very clear what they're suggesting. This article is going over the same point about the division of the Gaza Strip between North and South. Like, literally arguing a clear geographical separation must be created. Like, they're pushing that as if, like, I think because the Egyptian Sinai agenda, which got exposed and they pretend it's not true, even though their own documents got shown, kind of got imploded, right? So I think this is kind of like the secondary solution. Let's just take half more and wait till they give up again, and now we'll push later. You know, it's like, that's what it seems like. But there's no way you could pretend that taking half of the Gaza Strip is giving them anything. But that's clearly what they're trying to argue. And the idea that Biden has now stepped forward more and said, considering, which I don't think is real, considering holding back aid if Israel invades Rafah. Or rather, just specifically conditioning aid, which could be as dumb as him signing something saying he won't do it, and then he'll do it anyway. It's just so meaningless. Biden is a meek person, this whole thing. And I don't even think people behind him care. It's just so weak. Everything they do is so completely feeble, has no real outcome or action or consequence in the whole situation. So he said now, after 5 months of genocide, he goes, well, we're considering maybe putting conditions before in regard to Rafah. He's going to invade Rafah anyway. He keeps telling you that. And they're bombing Rafah right now anyway. So just realize it's inevitable as far as I can tell, unless something bigger happens. Here's Rabbi Shmuley being his completely lunatic self. I was just going to play a part where he pretends that Biden is literally betraying the entire Jewish people, which is not a people, it's a religion. But either way, they're betraying all of the Israeli people because he says that you condition arms for Rafah. Like, I'll tell you, man, I said this today about another tweet he was doing about Candace Owens, like completely melting down. He had like 20 likes and like 100 comments. The point was, this guy is absolutely losing it. And it is so very transparent. He just creeps me out, to be quite honest. He's a very, very disgusting person. And is, despite what they'll try to make it into, it has nothing to do with his religion. It's just, he's just a gross person that is advocating genocide every which way he can. and attacking people. And like the whole Candace Owens things, like I don't even care about any of them. But the point is, he's going after her in such a personal way and such a, like acting like he somehow knows that she is, here's why she says this, because she's completely repressed in her sexuality. It's like, how do you pretend you know that? All it shows you is that he will say anything to attack the people who he feels threatened by. Is that what a holy man does? just very disingenuous. My point, though, is that how are you going to pretend that you're betraying all of these people by demanding that you put conditions on on weapons transfers while you're committing genocide? What a betrayal. Bombing in Rafah yesterday. I was going to play this, but I'll play it as we get more into it. Just the reality of where they are. All these people bunched into the area. They know what's going on. Schumer calling for a new election in Israel. I just don't even know why he thinks that makes any sense. I mean, we know that because they don't care about democracy or whatever they pretend they care about. But it's just like these people, they're just so out of touch. Like, how dumb is that? Like, obviously, we're going to go, was that democracy? Like, what an idiot. But they don't care. And he stood up and said that Netanyahu's lost his way by allowing his political survival to take the precedence over the best interests of Israel. Netanyahu can, like, even as they're highlighting the fact that he's, like, they can't even bring themselves to be like, yeah, and they're murdering Palestinians. Like, which is essentially the point. Because the idea is that the war is in his political interest, not the interest of Israel. But that's murdering people. It's like, these people are so pro-Israel that they can't even say that while they're attacking Netanyahu. Of course, Mr. McConnell came over and said, how dare you attack the Israelis because they're our best ally kind of thing. And it's just this back and forth. But I don't even think any of it's real. They all support Israel. We all know that. It's blind support. But if you step out of line even slightly, other propagandists will step up and say this. How dare you, Schumer? He says, in all his wisdom, kind of going like, well, be kind to you if you step back, suggest that Israel has a two-state solution with. You see, the point is, he says that a two-state solution is the only thing that can solve this. But everyone in Israel is saying that's never going to happen. And if you actually pay attention, they've always said that. So it just shows you the disconnect between what he thinks you want to hear as an American and what is actually ever been the reality. From 67 forward, they have never allowed it. They've never allowed the agreement. They've never allowed them to come. Oh, you know what? I just realized. Oh, man. Too late. Hold on. I did not read that second part. Oh, you know what? I'm not going to be able to find it. In any case, there was a second part on the UN document that I didn't get to. Remember, I scrolled down. I didn't go to that. It was something important. Maybe I'll come back to it. Because it reminded me of it right there, actually, about the idea that the whole point that document highlights is that they did not allow them to come back. And that was what, ever since, the point has been rested on the fact that since then, this problem has existed. Ever since they have failed to allow them to come back as they signed to an agreement. So the point is, you can't deny that. This problem originates with Israel ignoring international law. No matter what you think and say, that's the reality. But he's acknowledging we'll never allow a two-state solution. Hamas, they raped and tortured. The PA will provide it. So all he's admitting here is there's literally nobody that you will allow that to happen with. No Palestinian group. And let's not forget, the only reason that's the way it is because they made sure those groups were the leading entities, both the PA and Hamas. Don't forget why. Because he said anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state, the thing he pretended he wanted, has to support bolstering Hamas, transferring money to Hamas, which, what do you think they arm themselves with? Money buys guns. This is part of our strategy, he says. And it goes on to say to make sure that they don't keep a state, they stay divided between the West Bank and Gaza. Read the article. The link is right there. Haaretz wrote this on October 9th, after October 7th. So you knew that he funds Hamas. That's important. So the point is, if they made sure Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, Fatah, and everything else was seen as a terrorist organization, so you would never have a two-state solution, that's what they're still doing. Who should we work with? That terrorist group or that terrorist group? You just have to recognize that they have manufactured that, and yet they've always kept the Palestinian people in the point of contention, under the boot, because of what they have created, not the Palestinians. AIPAC says Israel's an independent democracy. That's not even remotely true, but it says that decides for itself when elections are held and chooses its own leaders. Clearly, what's funny is again, an American organization, so we're told, seemingly got really bitter when they said something bad about the Israeli democracy. Isn't that funny? You're showing your true colors, but it says America must continue to stand with our ally, Israel, and ensure it has. Clearly, you're coming from a position that is like, how dare you say that about Israel? Like, it's just so transparent. And as I keep saying, is what I keep expecting from Zionists these days, not being self-aware enough to recognize how completely transparent what they're doing is. Hamas bears sole responsibility for this conflict. Again, that's not true, seeing as how it was funded for this purpose by Israel. But God forbid we talk about that. Oh, you know what I forgot? Anyway, I got into that, and then I forgot I was going to be rushing through like I always do. Still good on time. I wanted to talk about the port, even just briefly to point out. The Khaleesi points out one of the obvious, ridiculous points. Israel and the U.S. lift the blockade on Gaza, but not for aid. So they literally lift the blockade to be able to bring through machinery and things to build this ridiculous port, which is not even what it seems. And yet we're not supposed to put together that they didn't bring through humanitarian aid when that siege was. I mean, that's so transparent. It makes zero sense, as she says. I mean, it makes sense when you realize they're withholding aid. Not by accident, not because of checks, not because of Hamas, because they're starving people for deliberate political and terroristic purposes. As literally everybody, even J Street, even the United States, everyone's admitting. And now you can plainly see it. But guess what the port actually is? Now, what we showed you before is just details on it, showing you that I don't think you need 1,000 military personnel, a whole bunch of military seacraft and vehicles and support and CENTCOM command. You don't need any of that if it's just a port for humanitarian aid, especially if it's going to be facilitated by whoever the local entity is. But that's not what's happening. The reality is this is a military installation that is built, I argue, probably also for the mining. That's just my personal opinion. The billions upon billions of dollars that are potentially out there in LNG and oil. This just goes over these details. But it's also the fact that in this breakdown, same point. This is from the Arab region's first open source platform. I think it's Arcade Facts, highlighting one of the points that's included in the articles when you read it, which is that Reuters reported that United States plans to cooperate with Cyprus for the aid, in quotes, which is supposed to be the only point. I don't even think that's what this is about. But guess what? It says, and they'll examine shipments in coordination with Israel. I mean, when I saw that, I literally laughed out loud. I mean, that's, if you think, okay, so if we're acknowledging, even the U.S., that Israel forces are what is impeding the aid, and that you're going to build this port to be able to circumvent Israeli control and then allow their forces to do the same thing, do I even need to say it? It's not about the aid. Reuters explained that the corridor aims to bypass Israeli restrictions while letting them coordinate in inspections that are literally why aid right now is being stopped. I mean, it's manufactured failure, guys. That's important. It's not about the aid. And as Dan Cohen points out, he first reported on Israel's plan to build an island seaport in 2015. Let's remember, Biden's pretending this is his plan when Israel Katz, now Israel's foreign minister, proposed it. Now Biden adopts that plan, calling so they can pillage Gaza's sea resources. That's what I think too, at least part of it, as they exterminate the Palestinian population. This is from Mondoy's article. Israeli minister proposes building island off Gaza coast so they can disengage while maintaining siege. None of this has to do with helping them. This was a plan for military and exploitation. Arnaud Bertrand writes, first, this is just the Mohammed Shihada pointing out in Jerusalem Post article saying that Israel admits Biden's Gaza seaport has been Netanyahu's idea all along. Of course, they can't just let that go, right? They have to take credit for it. This is all, they're allies. Usually would expect them to kind of downplay things like that. But no, that's not usually how Israeli media works. Always screaming about how much they can control the United States, how much they can influence policy, but then when on the world stage acting otherwise. And that's not my opinion. It's public. It's very easy to look up. And it says, and it's part of Israel's plan to dismantle, I think, and replace UNRWA, as well as permanently cut Gaza off from Israel. Like this is all coordinated. It's written down. The other point, though, is he says, shows the extent to which the U.S. press misrepresents Biden, maybe by design. They introduce his humanitarian port proposal as an act of defiance against Netanyahu. I don't think that's a mistake. I think that's coordinated act to help Biden in the election. However you want to see that, or to swing efforts his way. if you think that, like I do, the election doesn't even matter. The point is, one side of the audience is the American audience who wants to think that Biden is doing the right thing in defiance of the bad guy, while over here, they're telling, which is the truth, is that, well, we're just getting Biden to do what we want. So people go, yay, you control the United States. And it very clearly is his plan. So they're just lying to everybody because that's what they do. Or rather, this example, they're not lying to the Israeli people about what's happening here, but I do are probably lying to them about what they're trying to accomplish. Either way, my point is always, as governments will lie to you, this seems to be about trying to salvage some clout for Biden. Netanyahu sees it as a ploy to undermine UNRWA and transfer the burden of delivering aid to other parties. Now, see, we just talked about the right of return. So all these different points are coming together. Now, if you can transfer the aid to this location, even though it's not really about the aid, it's about something you always wanted, but now you can just double up and two birds with one stone, say, well, UNRWA, we don't need you anymore. In the process, let's delete all your records. It all comes together, guys. Freddie Pontone did a great breakdown of this. Now, the first one was same video we showed earlier, saying simply the U.S. plans to establish the temporary pier off the Gaza coast, and the agenda is becoming more controversial by the day, as many believe it has a hidden agenda, which includes promoting the absorption and resettlement of displaced Palestinians. Now, what's interesting, and he goes over some of the pointed details, don't forget, this has already been talked about, right? We discussed this back when this first came out, and so I think Freddie did as well. This was the one that Freddie shared back on January 22nd. Had nothing to do with humanitarian aid. Do you remember what it was? It was the Gaza Alcatraz post, which is what, and actually this goes all the way back to 2017, posted directly from the minister Israel Katz, as we were just talking about, as Dan Cohen's pointed out. So this has nothing to do with anything they're talking about. First of all, pretending like this is about, even back then it had to do with displacement, but it was also just about control. It was about all sorts of things, including mining, I argue. So he posted this back in 2017, the same exact video. The vision for the establishment of Mule Island, artificial island off the coast of the Gaza Strip, right? And it does show lots of stuff for Gaza. Actually, here's what's interesting. If you watch this, it doesn't say, I don't think this even gets into like Gaza, Palestinians. Now, in January 22nd, 2024, all these years later, this gets repurposed into, hey, let's move all the Gazans over there. And it didn't really take. So now, all this time later, in March, like we can't remember that, they repurpose it to go, hey, let's build a port for aid. I mean, this is how transparent everything about this has been. So let's watch the video, which, by the way, is the same video now with different wording. Here's what it says.
Official Island Initiative is aimed at providing an answer to a reality that is bad for the Palestinians and not good for Israel. Today, Israel continues to be perceived as being responsible for the Gaza Strip and is, to a large extent, the only lifeline to it, even though it withdrew from the Strip over a decade ago. Construction of an artificial island with a port and civilian infrastructure installations off the coast of Gaza will provide the Palestinians a humanitarian, economic, and transportation gateway to the world, without endangering Israel's security. The artificial island, which will be internationally financed, built, and owned.
And you guys saw, I don't have to play the whole thing. I mean, we showed this on the show. We made a whole point about it. The idea of the Gaza Alcatraz. So just the main point for the podcast is this was proposed in 2017 as a solution for all sorts of things that had nothing to do with helping anybody. Then it gets proposed as, hey, let's build the same thing that we use that we want and will benefit us under a guise that we can help Palestinians have their own area. So right there, it was disingenuous. They don't care about them and they want what they already planned and they just want to bend it into helping them. Just disgusting. And again, today, it's being presented as the idea for the aid. It's the same kind of game, and it keeps getting pushed and pushed and pushed. It's all about something other than helping Palestinians. I just find that to be so wildly transparent. Now, we're going to end with the idea of how all of this, all the conversations we're having and the criticisms we're putting forward are all getting, at least attempted to be obfuscated by claiming that we just secretly only hate Jewish people. And as much as how that just screams stupidity. Of course it's possible. But the idea that you would just wash away all the provable facts because I wink, wink, secretly hate Jewish people, even though I've never said that. In fact, even though I've explicitly said the opposite, but wink, wink, I just hide that fact. It gets really stupid, especially when you can prove that ultimately the Zionist agenda goes back to the origins of being the very thing they're trying to attack. Openly anti-Semitic. In fact, using Jewish people, bombing Jewish people, forcing them into the areas that they don't want to be in for their benefit, using them as human shield, exactly the kind of conversations we have today. Or even the argument that we can show you from CIA documentation that literally admits the Zionist agenda was willing to sacrifice the Jews in Arab countries as long as they got the state that they wanted. You know, the state that they tried to align themselves with Nazi Germany with twice to make that happen. All of which is provable information. I don't even need to pull up the documents and the articles because all of you listening know this and we've gone through it many times. It ties directly back to provable historical documentation. You can look it up on Wikipedia. My point is, there's probably someone right now listening that goes, oh, fake news, just because that's, it's constant. Somebody will believe what they want to believe. Here is what we're getting told, and I think more, or rather less and less people are actually buying into this kind of narrative. Moshe just states on March 13th, the worst enemy we have are self-hating Jews. They do everything possible to undermine Israel as we're under attack in multiple countries. They wage the digital war against Jewish people. I don't know any Jewish person that's actively waging a war against other Jewish people. I'm sure it exists, just like I said anything can exist. But of course, what he's actually saying is that there are Jewish people who are highlighting what Israel's doing. And maybe even more so. I mean, just that alone is what gets called a self-hating Jew by Ben Shapiro, by all the people we talk about. I've shown you examples of every one of them attacking Jewish people for simply going ceasefire, peace. But even more, I just lost what I was saying. Other than just calling for ceasefire, some of them are actually realizing that Zionism is not what they were told and are finally going, wait a minute, look at this provable documentation. Wait a minute, look at what Theodore Herzl said. Wait a minute, look at all these things we can literally prove. Look at the Balfour Declaration, things that are not disputable. And yet they just go, you're racist. You hate Jews, or you're a self-hating Jew because you're pointing at things that we can prove. Now, I guarantee there are cases of people pointing at things that are fake. Even then, you can't prove they hate something unless they say that. But the overall point is criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. Criticism of Zionism is not anti-Semitic. It certainly can overlap, but you can't pretend that's all it is, because ultimately what you're doing is hiding the crimes of Israel. And really, that is the Zionist game. Zachary Foster, who's also a Jewish person, by the way, which we didn't even care to highlight in the episode because it's not relevant to whether he's an expert in Palestine, but he is an expert. He has a PhD in Palestinian history from Princeton. And we had an amazing interview, by the way. I really hope you'll check it out and grab that for you. I'll include that in the show notes. But here's what he said. Many of us Jews who criticize Israel do so because of our Jewish upbringing and Jewish values. Not Zionist, but Jewish. He says these values teach us, unlike the Zionist agenda, standing on one foot. Oh, by the way, I should say, I'm inserting those. That's not Zachary's words. Let me start over. Here's what he said. Many of us Jews who criticize Israel do so because of our Jewish upbringing and Jewish values. These values teach us, standing on one foot, do unto others as you want done to you. Pretty basic sentiment, right? Common to a lot of different moral-based mindsets. It says, which begs the question, Moshe, do you want a genocide to be perpetrated against you and others in Israel? If not, then you've forgotten the essence of the Torah, in which case it seems you are the Jew who has forgotten their Judaism, not the other way around. Well said. And of course, this person jumps in and tries to attack him, and Zachary just goes, maybe you want to check into Anti-Semites Anonymous, which is hilarious because the guy loses his mind. He goes, you're calling me an anti-Semite? Which is like, they don't know their own history in the sense of what a Semite really is. But the point is that this is a common thread that we keep seeing. The one I'll just include is the one I pointed out from Ben Shapiro, right? Where this was on October 18th. All you're seeing is Jewish Voices for Peace. Or is it Voice? I keep mixing those up. Where they're having a very peaceful protest where they're simply clapping and singing, and their shirts say, Jews say ceasefire now. In any other context, in any other night, it doesn't matter anywhere. That's a peaceful sentiment. Even if you think they're somehow naively incorrect, it's good intention. They're calling for peace. But rabid Zionists like Ben Shapiro can't handle that. He literally says, useful idiots for Hamas. Nothing about that's for Hamas. It's about civilians. Hamas and Israel are the two battling sides. Ceasefire is for all the civilians around it all. You keep pretending by calling for peace that means Hamas can murder more. It doesn't, because you know damn well as anybody else that Israel's going to do whatever it wants to do anyway, whether or not you allow both sides to have exchange hostages and bring in aid for all the people. My point is, if you agreed to a full ceasefire, like a legitimate ceasefire that would last unending, you know the moment they wanted to, they would go right back to whatever they want. The moment they got their hostage back, they just go, something happened, and now we're back at it. That's what they've done every single time. So all you're effectively doing is maintaining a situation that allows your people to stay in Gaza. That's the only thing that keeps happening. As I said, Ben Shapiro attacks and denigrates the Jews protesting below who dare to simply call for a ceasefire. So who's the gross one here, right? Who's the anti-Semite? Now here's Arsen Atrovsky. South Africa recently spoke up and said to dual citizens of South Africa and Israel, which appear to be a very common thing all over the world, but specific to Israel, which I find very interesting. That there's dual citizens everywhere, but my point is this prominent overlap to that within governments and things like that I find very interesting. And of course, again, people would love to make that about anything other than Zionist influence, but that's all we're talking about. And the point we'll get at the end is why they try to conflate Zionism with anti-Semitism, because that right there is the last grasping effort to pretend that when I say Zionism, I mean wink, wink, same thing. But they're telling the dual citizenship in South Africa, when you come home, we're going to arrest you. If you're fighting in a genocide right now, when you come home, we're going to arrest you, which was very clear what South Africa thinks. And here's what Arsen says. There is seemingly no end to South Africa's downfall into irrelevance, literally the opposite, whether or not it's for bad things, but says, and Jew hatred. It's just a go-to, guys. It's a go-to. It is the 1-2 punch of exactly how you're supposed to respond as a Zionist. There's nothing about any of that has anything to do with Jewish people, even remotely. You're literally talking about your own people, Arsen. You're talking about, these are people that have citizenship in South Africa. They're simply saying, since you're a citizen here, you've broken the law, you're going to go to jail. How you even try to bend that into being about Jewish people shows you your racism. It shows you your desperate Zionist effort to make it only about Jewish people. You guys are sick in the head. You are literally trying to make hatred about Jewish people when that's not even what it's about. This is why there's a massive movement of Jewish organizations finally finding the courage to say, you guys don't represent us. Stop pretending that you do. And here is the conflation I was talking about. The Persian Jewish, who was this, actually, I thought it was an account that was bigger. Maybe it's the one, I was thinking about the wrong one. The Persian Jewess is what this account is called. And she simply says, anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism. No, it's not. It's like saying anti-Republican is being anti-Christian. It doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. It says, rebrand your Jew hate however you want, right? So pretending that we all secretly think what she assumes we do, but Jews didn't survive centuries of persecution because we can't tell what genocidal maniacs want to wipe us from existence. Yes, even the genocidal maniacs with Harvard degrees. Well, it's a very weird and disjointed statement that has no basis in reality. First of all, plenty of Jewish organizations will tell you that they're not constantly being oppressed right up to this very day. There's racism like there always is, but this idea that there's more focus on that other than it's just that's what Zionism is trying to create. That's where that push comes from. But the idea that it says Jews didn't survive centuries of persecution because you can't tell who wants to wipe us out. Well, I mean, that's the opposite of what happened in regard to Nazi Germany. So what you're saying is not true anyway. You didn't see, it's ridiculous. Like, she's literally just making these arguments that are trying to set you in a position to make it out to be that because you highlight Zionism as a problem, that you secretly want to go after all the Jewish people in the world. And then what she's saying is because they've been fighting persecution their whole lives, that she can sniff it out. How does that even make sense to somebody anywhere, somebody standing in the middle of Argentina that says anti-Zionism is bad, and you somehow know that person's mindset? You know what they think about, I mean, it's so stupid. It's desperate. Or she's completely blinded by the Zionist agenda. And here is somebody speaking up saying, no, it's not. How dare you even suggest it? I'm a Jew and I'm not a Zionist. Now, you could argue they're lying, but the point is there's very prominent groups that will scream about that. And quite frankly, I'm beginning to think it's the majority. Here, same point. Oscar J says, no, it's not. Zionism is a political ideology founded 150 years ago. It's true. Judaism is a religion founded 2,500 years ago, which is also true. That alone should end the point, shouldn't it? It says we're not hating Jews, we're hating Zionists who steal land, homes, and mass kill Palestinians, children and kids. Civilians and kids. It's quite a simple notion. It really is. You see how completely destroyed that argument is? It's all personal perspective and personal, and he just breaks it down with basic facts. It's like, well, yeah, that makes no sense now. How can you argue this political group that has existed a fraction of the time somehow is the same thing? It doesn't make any sense. Hen Mazig, one of the same people doing the same thing, simply says, denying Jewish history and our connection to Israel is an act of hate. That's all. I said, no one is denying the history of the religion of Judaism. See, his game there is to make it out to be Jewish history, meaning the history of Israel. It's not the same thing. Israel is a state, an illegal occupied state, by the way. Not to say that it should cease to exist, but it's just that is the truth, right? It's an illegal occupation. And if they accepted the deal in 1967 and actually allowed the Palestinians to come back, well, then it would currently be a legal state. That's their choice. But conflating the history of Israel with the history of the Jewish religion is exactly why that guy got mad on Twitter just now. How dare you pretend that you own all of our history? This is a fraction in a Zionist agenda around all of the history of Judaism. And I said, no one is denying the history of the religion of Judaism. They're denying the provable lies surrounding the history of Zionism, an extremist, openly racist political organization. Conflating the two is offensive. Only racists and Zionists make this about Judaism. And here's my point from before. I make a very clear point, very explicit. And this random account, which to me is most likely a bot account, says, don't think that they... And then, given that classic, like multiple parentheses, that's supposed to be a racist symbol, any form of Jewish religion or Zionism can be separated. Why? Because they all believe in the fake Holocaust, which I don't agree at all with that. I don't believe the Holocaust was fake. I think that's ridiculous. Now, I can easily have a conversation about whether there's conflated information, but the idea here, like, listen to someone like Norman Finkelstein, who will completely make anybody trying to pretend it's not real, you will get talked down and talked circles around because he knows what he's talking about. My point, though, is that this kind of thing, my opinion would be, this is engineered. And even more funny, if you want to look at it and make fun of this complete maniac down here, one of these people that I have muted all the time, that somebody else pointed out to me, they're like, you got to look at this. I rarely ever look at anything below this line, I never look at. Because I mute people that I think are just there to troll. So just keep screaming into the wind. Let them scream. It's hilarious. You can look at them. You'll find them. I have the same people on all my posts if you look beneath that mark. My point is, he stands up and he goes, see, that's we do it. It's like totally engineered, in my opinion. It's completely ridiculous. And the whole idea is to make it seem like I am secretly caught because it's not true. If you just read what I said, it's not true. But this is desperate because people are finding the courage to call this out. Here's Torah Judaism. You can watch the video for yourself. It's just a 3-minute video of him explaining the same things, but they're all there's a massive group. This is the one I tend to point to just because they're very big. Oh, I didn't notice they followed me. They're very big. They're in UK, Israel, the United States. They're all over, but there's multiple other groups like this, also very large, and other groups that aren't even like dedicated to calling out Zionism, but they're called Torah Judaism. They're a big group. They've got almost 300,000 followers now. They post this all the time. Israel is not a Jewish state. Israel never represents the Jews. Zionism is not Judaism. Judaism is against Zionism. Judaism is a religion. Zionism is a political ideology. So at the very least, you can acknowledge that a massive, massive organization of Orthodox Jews think the same thing I do. And we'll tell you that it's a political ideology. So what does that make you think about some of these other people that are screaming these lies? Now, here's the last one. Eve Barlow, a proud Zionist, says, I know you all have a desperate need to be liked. But put that aside for 1 second and ask yourself honestly if you have any idea why else you are invested in passing comment about a war in a part of the world you know nothing about, in which you don't speak the languages. I couldn't believe that. Anyone that starts with it like, I know you all think this, usually they're pulling from their own personal beliefs. That's usually how it works. I just thought that was funny. And I simply said, I think that's clear projection, Eve. But the answer is simple, because we have compassion, humanity, clearly something you struggle with. Zionism is anti-Semitism, which clearly upset her because she blocked me immediately, which I think is funny. And I simply said, another example of how fragile this racist Zionist ideology truly is. They can't take the slightest bit of genuine pushback without resorting to either erroneously claiming you hate Jews, or simply blocking you if that does not scare you away. I love everyone with compassion. It's just crazy, right? I mean, her point was, I know you all have desperate needs to be liked. Just like, you're projecting a little bit. But how can you ask that? Why do you care about this war over here? Because we care, because we're human beings. Clearly something that you have a problem with. And just to show you a very vivid example of what's going on for Ramadan this year, that's a little bit different than the other years where they attack people on Ramadan. Here's 2023 Ramadan on the right. On the left is the street today. That's what's happening on Ramadan right now. I just want people to really reflect on what that means. Imagine this is your hometown. That's your home strip. That's where you grew up. That's where you had your first drink. That's where you went out with your friends for the first time. That's where your life was. And then they said, well, human shields, and they murdered everybody there and bombed everything, and now it doesn't exist. If you think that you can go, yeah, but bad guy, and make some kind of sense of that, I think you have a real problem. I think that you are dealing with accepting the fact that you might be a sociopath, or that you don't care about human life for other reasons. But either way, I want people to really think about how clear that is. And if you're trying to pretend like these narratives are something else and just trying to hold on to that because politics, and you actually have, you have something in you telling you this is wrong, trust it. It is wrong. They don't care. See it, call it out, because we are changing this moment by moment, and you don't want to wake up and realize that you allowed this to continue the whole time. Now, I'll end with this video that Khaleesi shared, just to confirm same things we've been talking about. Another video to confirm that there is no bigger threat to the world now than Zionism. Not Israel, not Jews, none of that. Zionism. Now, obviously, right now, Israel is controlled by the Zionist government, but Israel is just a location. My point would be that if you remove the Zionist threat, which is pretty much all of their government, there's still a very clear influence on the population, which will never really go away. That's just how that works. Same thing with the U.S. government influencing Americans to be mindlessly pro-war. The point would be that you remove the Zionist influence, that you could come to some kind of amicable resolution, like a two-state solution that everybody would probably accept, and that threat would be alleviated, at least in that time frame. And that is the problem. Not the location, but the actual creation of the illegal state to begin with because of the Zionist entity. Before they did that, they were living in peace, which has been reported countless times from people that are educated on the topic, people that have documentation to prove it, people like Avi Shalom. But this is an ex-Mossad agent. He says, my job was to brand Americans who oppose Israel as anti-Semites. Our motto is to deceive. That's the real motto of Mossad. I think it's through deception, make war. That's actually their motto. Look it up. It's very easy to prove. And yet we quibble that they're lying to us. It says they will weaponize anti-Semitism against any dissent for Israel. 100%. Well, thank you for tuning in today, guys. Always so much to cover, so many important things. I just hope that people are truly taking this stuff to heart, and not just, I know that we get caught up in this stuff and it can become, sort of like the new reality TV show for some people. And I really caution against that. This should not be stuff that we enjoy, no matter how much we like seeing people that get what they got coming, or people getting exposed for what they've always been called, never been called out for. Those are positive moments, but we should not let this become sort of like an endorphin reward system where we're, this needs to be something that we always engage with as dire and serious and just real. These are human lives we're talking about, but also recognize that we're seeing a very rapid positive change. It may not be that obvious right now because of how much pushback and how the people in the positions of authority are not letting it happen. But we are seeing a massive shift in perception right now that is nothing if not positive. The murder is happening because they don't want you to see it. That's the byproduct, not because of it. They're doing that. But it just shows you how bad the thing is that we're truly trying to stop. And that's not even just Zionism, guys. That's the influence of it in all these other locations, including the current governments of a lot of Western nations that are being seen for what they are. So thank you for continuing to fight for that. Now, I'll end today by including the link for the Save Last American Vagabond website. I want to point out, or the Go Give Send Go. I want to point out that we've surpassed that mark, which I really can't even find the words to express how much that means to me and how much it means that you guys are there to support this platform at a time of need, which, as you know, those that have followed this long time, it rarely ever happened. I mean, for the first like 7 years, I didn't even ask for anything from anybody. You know, it's the point is that we're finally getting to this point where we're making a difference. You know that. They do too. And it's coming down. And we're going to keep fighting. But I want to remind everybody, I had an interview with Derek I'm going to put out tomorrow, I think, about this kind of conversation. That going forward, this whole setup, the Save TLAV page, is a monthly thing. Not that we have to reach 10,000 every month. That wasn't even the point. It was just a lofty number to put up there. But the goal is to raise the recurring donation amount. But, you know, if you want to donate, please, it still helps us tremendously. But if you're thinking about donating 50, 20 bucks, give me $1 recurring instead. Never think about it again. That's what we're trying to find. And trying to make this number increase every month on the first day. You know, on the first, we'll see how much recurring number is there. And that's going to be the point that we try to build. Either way, we're not going to stop, guys. We're going to keep pushing because we believe in you. So believe in us. And I'll leave you with that video that I think is important to see, that there's just these lies have never, ever, ever stopped. So thank you for tuning in today. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
I was born in Canada, in Edmonton, Alberta. I grew up in Israel because my mother was born in Jerusalem. And my father was born in Canada. And he came to Israel to fight in 48. And I was born in 49. He really fought hard. But the thing is, I grew up in Israel. When I was in Israel, my children went to school in Israel. They were Israelis. One daughter was born in Canada. Just to give you a background on myself, I served in the Israeli army for 3 years. Then, after that, I left Israel for a while. I came back. I rejoined the Navy. I finished in the rank of lieutenant commander in the Israeli Navy. I was then recruited to the Mossad. I reached the rank of colonel in the Mossad, and that's when I left. The Mossad has a slogan, which is the anthem of the Mossad, if you want to call it. It's a biblical term. It says, "By way of deception, thou shalt do war." And that's what's on the logo of the Mossad, which, by the way, the only place it's ever been seen is on the internet on my homepage. Yes, is Judaism a race, a common history, a religion, a culture? Judaism is, I'll tell you, Judaism is, first of all, a religion. Then it becomes a nation. As far as race, there's a problem with that. I'll tell you why. Because most of the non-Sephardic Jews are descendants of a nation called the Khazari, or the Khazarian. So there is no such thing as dual loyalty. This is a myth. People say, well, you know, the Jewish community has a dual loyalty. That's wrong. Either you're loyal to your country or you're not. There is no duality in that. You cannot be loyal to two countries. Never will Israel agree to have an Israeli support the U.S. the way they expect people in the Jewish community to support Israel. There are more people in Israeli jails for supporting or helping U.S. intelligence than you have Israelis in American jails. Because anytime there was a guy that was sat 15 years in Israeli prison, and nobody knew about him. He was a major in the Air Force, and he was arrested because he met with a secretary from the American embassy, and allegedly was intending to help the CIA. He didn't help the CIA. Nobody said he did. He intended. And 15 years later, they said that he's in jail. He was incommunicado. Nobody knew where he was. He disappeared. I had my second book. I had a record with my second book. I think my first book sold something around the world, close to 8 million copies. My second book was not reviewed in any newspaper in North America. Now that's a record. None. No, I'm sorry. I think the guy in the Phoenix Gazette and the people from B'nai B'rith walked in and asked for him to resign. Yeah, because he's an anti-Semite. Now, I know what they do because I used to ask them to do it. I mean, when I was in the Mossad and we had a guy that gave us problems in the U.S., and he was speaking out, and he was talking like Pete talked once and said, Israel is bombing Lebanon with cluster bombs. We say, hey, who's that guy? You know? Pete Makaki, we used to call him. Yeah, which is Pete the cockroach. Because he makes a lot of noise and you can't get rid of him. So what you do is you get in touch with a guy in the station in New York or in the station in Washington. You say, tell the guys at B'nai B'rith to label him. And of course the campaign starts, and before you know it, the guy's labeled. And he's an anti-Semite. Because that's what we say he is. And that's one stain you cannot wash. Now, it shames me as a Jew to tell you that. But that's the fact. And it's wrong.